Good morning, everyone. I'd like to welcome you to the 2002 LEISWA Water Summit, and I would like to acknowledge the following LEISWA board members and elected officials that have come today. What a great group. If there's a theme to LEISWA, and the theme correlates, it's partnership, it's cooperation. I've never been in an organization with more branches and more integration of more diverse agencies in my entire life. So the work we do, the partnerships we have are all important. So as we see the people stand up, these are not people that we never see or we never integrate with. These are people that generally are kind of the lifeblood of what drives us, and there's just a lot of us. So I'll start with my name is Dale Welty. I'm on the LEISWA board, and I'm a councilman from the city of Canyon Lake. And if you want to stand, Phil Williams from the LEISWA board. Phil's also director, so he wears a couple hats. And I'm going to go through the names, and if I forget one of your hats that you wear, because there's so many of you that wear many hats, please forgive me. I would say, hey, oh, by the way, Dylan's hat is this, so you can have that on, so feel free. Brendan Denstead, Western Municipal Director. She's also a softball alternative director and NWD board director, so she's got a list. We couldn't get a name tag for it. It would run like a ribbon. So that couldn't happen. We also have Bobby can't be here today, Kevin Jeffries can't be here, and also Mark Norman cannot be here today. So just know that they're on the board. The second group we have, I'd like to have softball stand up, and that is Jeff Winston. Rick Winston. SOPA, basically is the Santa Ana Watershed Project Authority. They are kind of the umbrella of the whole watershed. So they are important to us. What they really do for LEISWA is they really are the technical support. I don't know anything about engineering water or how to make dams work. So these two guys in their group, they're the ones that come to us and say, here's the information you need to know. So thank you guys. Let's go with the City of Lake Elsinore. We have Mayor Tim Sheridan. City Manager. Nicole Dolly, Deputy City Mayor. And Steve Banos, Council Member. The City of Elsinore is incredibly important with the help of obviously the Lake of Lake Elsinore. So it is the partnership between EVMWD and the City of Lake Elsinore that really drives the help of that lake. LEISWA provides technical support, gives them some ideas, helps them with some funding ideas, but the legwork is done fortunately by EVMWD and the city. So just want to appreciate what these guys are doing. I don't know if you know this, but EVMWD donates millions. How many acre feet of water?
5.5 million gallons a day.
5.5 million gallons a day. So without any donates, it could work that. But thanks to what they do, we have a lake. It would be very difficult to keep a lake without their support. And the Elsinore Valley Municipal Water District, we have Greg Thomas as the General Manager. Very helpful staff he runs, and as far as our relationships, what a great group. Chance Edmondson as a director. Harvey Ryan as a director. And we'll move on to the other lake. City of Canyon Lake, we have Chris Mann. There's another organization, it's not really part of the government, but it is very integral in the partnership with Canyon Lake, and that's the Canyon Lake POA, and we have a director, Renee Griffiths. Renee, again, works with EVMWD in the sense that the partnership we have, we've done some dredging things in the past. We have the alum treatment with LEISWA, and of course, EVMW owns the lake, and Canyon Lake rents the surface rights. So that partnership is every day. I would say this lasts longer than most marriages, our relationship. So it's quite an exciting journey, but extremely helpful. The next group is Western Municipal Water District. We have Mike Gardner. He's a director and a Southwood commissioner. Okay, I gotta go to the second page. Let's see. I'm sorry, I have to adjust the microphone. I may have missed the second page. So we have some more people from Municipal Water District here. Anyone else I haven't mentioned?
Oscar Bisbee and Laura Brown.
Okay, I hope that kind of gives you a view of who everyone is in the room. If you have any questions, you can see the people after this meeting. You can go talk to them. And remember, this is a partnership. We're all working together, and our ability to communicate at events like this is absolutely critical to the success of what we're doing. Okay? Anyway, thank you for joining us and supporting us in the critical role LEISWA plays. And I would now like to hand over the microphone to Nicole Daly.
Good morning, everybody. It's great to be here today. Sorry to see that Mark Morton couldn't be here today. I know he's the face of LEISWA for a long time, but something about me, actually, when I got out of college, my first job, I worked for a public relations firm, and LEISWA was actually my first client in 2005. So for 17 years, I've had the privilege and opportunity to work on the lake, and also Lake Elsinore resident since 1989 and own a home here raising my kids here. And so the lake's important to me, right? And so it's always been my honor to be able to work on this lake. And I'm so encouraged to see all of you here today, especially coming out of COVID. It's nice to be in an event like this. See so many faces I haven't seen in person for so long. But also because there's a lot of activity taking place and a lot of exciting projects that are to come for Lake Elsinore and Canyon Lake. And to know that you all are here to learn about that and support those efforts is so encouraging. So thank you. We created this event in 2007 when I worked for that firm, and I wondered, did anyone come to that back in 2007? Anybody in the room that was around back then? It was at Ortega High School. Right, that was an idea that Mark Gordon, the Water District, and I started way back then, and it's great to see it continuing for that very reason, because we knew that Lake Elsinore and Canyon Lake are extremely complex water bodies, and we need this opportunity to help educate individuals about that so that you can support the efforts moving forward, whether that's funding, legislation, or anything else. So thank you. LEISWA was actually formed in 2000 from a proposition with some funding from the state. The Joint Powers Authority that was really designed to improve the water quality and the wildlife habitats in Lake Elsinore, Canyon Lake, and the surrounding watershed. This includes looking at projects to improve the water quality, securing reliable funding sources, also the TMDL task force, which is really the regulatory side in terms of maintaining the water quality of the watershed, and then also looking at reliable revenue sources for the future. And I think that's where we're headed. So I think we have a lot of momentum of great opportunities that can be done here, but the size of Lake Elsinore is so great that it requires a lot of money for us to do more. So, and before I jump to our first speaker today, I want to say thank you and welcome to Launch Point. This is the City of Lake Elsinore's premier camping resort destination. We hope you will come back and visit us and stay here. We have a lot of great amenities. This was opened in July of 2019. We're very proud of this facility here because it showcases our beautiful lake. Okay, so today we have several presentations from key partners who've worked with LEISWA for many, many years. They conduct research and seek solutions to improve water quality conditions throughout our watershed. First up, we have John Rudolph, who is a senior aquatic ecologist, bioassessment program manager, that's a long title, for Wood Environment and Infrastructure Solutions Incorporated. And I've known John for the last 7 years since he's worked on our lake. He has over 22 years of specialized research, ecological managing complex test environmental sampling programs for both public and private agencies, including stream, estuarine, lake, and ocean sampling. He has extensive aquatic ecology bioassessment experience and has successfully managed field programs ranging from small-scale, urban point source evaluations to full remote watershed assessments. He has served as a project manager for the Lake Elsinore Canyon Lake Nutrient TMDL monitoring program for the last 7 years, and he's my go-to whenever I want to know anything about the lake, because these guys know all the stats and the data, and I'm excited for him to tell you about our fishery management project the last couple of years. Thank you, John.
Okay. Well, I was honored to be the first one here today to kind of kick off the meeting. So, as Nicole mentioned, I'm an ecologist and I have a very big interest in fisheries specifically, and I do a lot of aquatic insect research as well. So I was really happy to see that we're kicking off the conference today with a fish talk, and then we're also going to be ending the conference today with a fishing demonstration, which I'm really excited to see. So we were able to spend some time at William Mountain Lake as part of this project I'll be talking about today a couple years back. So I'll be talking to you today about the fisheries assessment for Lake Elsinore that we did back in 2019, fall of 2019 specifically. And there were several different objectives that we were looking for as far as this fisheries management program goes. Now, there was a fishery assessment of the lake done back in 2003, and it was essentially a carp removal effort. They knew that there was a lot of carp in the lake. It was becoming a water quality problem because the carp will root around on the bottom of the lake, stir up the sediment, which then releases phosphorus into the water column, and then you get algae blooms. So there was a large carp removal effort back then where they removed, I think it was on the order of like 1.5 million tons of fish or something, very, very large amount of fish from the lake. And it's successful, very successful. They did find there was quite a few there. And so what they wanted to do, when we were talking about this, let's go back and let's reassess to see where this stands now. So one of the main objectives of the project was to determine not only just the overall ecological health of the lake, but is there a need for any more of this removal of what they call the nuisance fish population, which are causing water quality issues, specifically the carp. And so that was one of our main tasks in this. And then from that, can we come up with some strategies for looking at future efforts, whether it's stocking or additional removal efforts that would have to happen as a result of this, that we would need to be planning for, 5 years down the road, 10 years down the road, or something like that. So that was essentially the objective for this program. So I'll walk you through kind of what we did to determine whether the carp could become overpopulated again, as well as just kind of the overall ecological health of the fishery. So when you're looking at the biology of the lake, there's a few different things you want to look at. It's not just the fish. I mean, everyone sees the fish and everyone's interested in fish. People like to go fishing, but people don't go fishing for zooplankton. They don't go fishing for phytoplankton, right? Those aren't like the exciting things. But they have a big part to do with the water quality of the lake, right? It's all part of one big ecological system. So the things that we did, not only the fish, we did that in 3 different ways. And so again, this is back in September, October of 2019. We decided we were going to do a little bit different than what was done back in 2003. In 2003, the organization, the consultant that did that work, essentially just used beach seines. So large beach seines where they would go out to the lake, and I'll show you some pictures of our efforts so you kind of understand what that's like. But they essentially used one way to catch the fish that focused mainly on the shallow areas of the lake, the inshore areas. We decided, because we know of the bathymeters of the lake, there's multiple different types of habitat in Lake Elsinore. You have the shallow areas, sure, a lot of beach area, but there's also some of the deeper areas that weren't assessed back in 2003. So we wanted to make sure we hit those too. And so we had 3 different ways that we were looking at the fish. One was the beach seine, which is focusing on the shallow, nearshore areas. We also did some purse seines, and I'll show you some pictures of what these are just to get an idea. It's a purse seine type technique where this is the deep areas of the lake, the upper water column of those deep areas of the lake. And then finally, we did something that's called otter trawls, which is, again, the deep areas of the lake, but we're assessing the bottom portion, okay? Not the top, but the bottom portion. So those are 3 different ways that we looked at the fish, 3 different techniques, 3 different habitats that we're typically hitting. So we can make sure we're hitting all of the different habitats in Lake Elsinore, not just the shallow areas. And that's going to be important as I get into later in the talk. We'll see why that's important. Of course, as I just mentioned, there's two different types of plankton we want to sample. One is the zooplankton, which are the little, crustaceans. They're copepods, if you know what those are, or little water fleas, things that swim around the water column, eat algae. And then, of course, the phytoplankton, which we all know is in Lake Elsinore. So these are the three different types of fishery collection techniques that we use. We have in the upper water, well, I guess the laser pointer doesn't work on the screen. Oh well, okay. Not on the TV. So the purse seine, that's the upper water column. So essentially what this is like is you have a boat that goes out, it puts a net out in the water, it drives in a big circle, puts a net around, and then by pulling on the rope, it kind of pulls up the net into a purse, like purse strings, right? And it's just sampling the upper water column of those deeper areas. We also did the otter trawl in the deeper water. There's a good depiction of it there. It's essentially a net with a couple of boards that spread out the net and drags across the bottom, getting all those fish that are in, say, the bottom, 6 to 8 feet of the water column, right on the bottom. And then we've got the purse seine down there in the bottom left. This is a net that's strictly for shallow areas. It's only about, say, 8 feet deep at max, and it gets the full water column within that shallow area. So those are three different techniques. And so what we did is we divided up the lake into getting some bathymetry maps. We knew where the different deeper areas were versus the shallow areas. And we divided up the lake into three different areas. There was the shallow area, which is depicted by that very light blue, kind of that teal color, which is about 50% of the lake area. There's a moderate area, which is about 8 to 16 feet. And then you got the deep area, which is the darker blue, is the deepest portion of the lake. And that's about 25% of the lake. So we have about 25% in the near shore, shallow areas, about 50% of the lake is kind of this mid 8 to 16 feet, and then you have about another 25% of the lake that's greater than 16 feet deep. And so we wanted to hit all these different types of habitat because we figured fish like different habitats, right? You have some that like deep, some that like shallow, some like structures, some that don't. So you want to be able to hit all these different areas. And so we strategically did our different trawls, so that the lines are where we did the trawls. Those are our trawl tracks. So we were pulling along the otter trawl along the bottom. A couple of different points that are a little bit hard to see. Orange points, the PS3 and PS2 and so forth, those are the purse seine areas where we have the circular net that's sampling just the upper water column. And then along the shoreline, you can see there's some polygons there, some really light polygons. Some of them are blown up into these other images on the top there. Those are our beach seine areas. Those are right around in shallow areas, the entire water column of those shallow areas. And so you'll notice kind of obvious when you look at the map, but you don't see any sort of sampling kind of on the bottom left or in the upper right. And there's a specific reason for that, because the aeration arms that go out to Lake Elsinore from these different compressors, that's where those areas go out, and we didn't want to drag our nets across and just mess up the lines and pull up all of the aeration lines. So that's why you're not seeing any sampling going on in the bottom of the upper right. That was done on purpose, so we don't mess up the aeration system in Lake Elsinore. And so moving on to the fishery observations themselves, showing you some pictures. This is one of our beach seine efforts. So starting in the upper left, you'll see that's what we were loading the beach seine. It's a very large beach seine. It's like 500, 600 feet long. So we use a boat to deploy that. So the boat, we load up the net into the boat. They kind of drive around in a semicircle, starting at the beach, going out a ways and coming back in. That's in the upper right. And then the bottom right, you see, okay, we're starting to pull it in now. This is all done by hand, manual. We had a lot of people out there, probably 15 to 20 people pulling this net because it's very heavy. And then in the bottom left there, you see we come in. This is one of our first efforts. A bunch of fish in the net there. And then you just start pulling the fish out of the net, which for carp, it can be very difficult. They've got some spines that they really like to get hung up in the net, so it's kind of difficult to get them out. But we pull all the fish in, start picking them in the net, sorting them into different buckets for the different types of species, and then you end up with something like this. So in the upper right, the upper left, we've got a couple of buckets, one of mosquito fish in the left side and one of these silver sides, which I'll be talking about in a minute. On the right, we go through and we weigh them all to get a biomass estimate of what's in the lake for each of the different species. So we're weighing and measuring all the fish that we catch. We caught well over 4,000 fish, so there's a lot of weighing and measuring. And then the bottom, in the top right there, we go through, we have some volunteers out there with us. The guy in I don't remember his name, but the guy in that maroon shirt there, he was a volunteer who just lives in the local community. We had, each and every effort that we went out, we would have a public outreach. Okay, let's get some of the community involved here so they can really see, that the city of Lake Elsinore and LEISWA is really trying to promote on the lake and trying to improve their water quality and find out what's going on in the lake. So we're really getting them involved. We got them in there taking data for us, measuring fish for us, weighing fish for us, and they really enjoyed it quite a bit. And then, of course, here's William Johnson. He was talking about the big one that got away. Right? This is the one, the big carp that got out of the net.
Jonathan Skinner.
What?
That's Jonathan Skinner.
Is that you, Jonathan? Yeah. Oh, I thought that was him. Shoot. Yeah, so we had a lot of fun here. It was a good day. It was really hot. I think I remember one of the days was over 107. 4 days out there. So it was a lot of sweat. Okay, here's a couple of pictures of the purseine. I don't have great pictures of the purseine because it's hard to see because it's all underwater, obviously. But in the upper left, we have the boat again, kind of driving in a circle, putting out the purseine, and then in the upper right, they're starting to pull it in into the boat. And then in the bottom, you see there, that's the otter trough. You can see the couple of boards that was in the earlier depiction that kind of spreads out the mouth of the net, and then it just drags along the bottom of the water. Just to give you some visuals of what these things actually are. All right, so here's some of the fish everyone's interested in and seeing what's going on. These are the 10 types of fish that we caught, and all the different types of habitat there. Everything from bluegill, the crappie, catfish, largemouth bass, redfin shad, and then if you read the rest of them there. The one that we have the most common of, you'll see here on the next slide, is the silverside. These are bait fish. So those silversides, minnows, were probably about, on the average of anywhere from an inch to maybe 3 inches long. The next most abundant one was mosquito fish. We found quite a few of those, and then carp following. But these are just depictions of all the different types of fish we caught out there. Now the actual numbers. So you can see the total number of fish that we caught along all methods and all depths, 4,791 fish. So quite a few fish. This is across 3 different sampling methods. What you'll also notice is that by far, the habitat where we caught the most fish was the shallow beach scene areas. So close to 90% of the fish were caught just in the 0 to 8 foot depth range with the beach scene. And some fish we only caught in some habitats, some fish we only caught in other habitats, and some fish we caught across all 3 types of habitats. Specific, I think the only one we caught across all 3 was the carp. But as you got into those deeper areas, especially the bottom deeper areas, we only caught 2. So out of all of the carp that we caught, only 2 were caught in the very deep areas. And you'll just notice, typically the shallow areas we're getting most. So even in the purseine, the upper water column of the shallow areas, we tended to catch a bit more. And as you get into those deeper areas, we're not catching as much. But by far, you can see the silverside minnow was over half the fish that we caught. And then the mosquito fish was the next most abundant one, followed by the carp at 311 total fish. So you can kind of see the different types of fish that we caught there and the abundance. And the point that I wanted to make by showing this by depth and by collection technique was that all of them, over 90% of them, were captured in shallow areas. This is going to be important as we move on because I'll wait to explain something about the way the 2003 type survey was performed. It was a bit different than we did this way, estimating the total fish population of the lake. It's important how you characterize and where the fish are captured as far as how you determine total fish estimates, right? Because we're not sampling the entire lake, right? We're just doing here and there, just kind of samplings, random sampling throughout to give us an estimate of what's going on in the lake overall. And how you then extrapolate that to the entire lake, there's different techniques to do that. And it was done differently back in 2003 than we did it here. I believe our estimates are better, and I'll tell you why here in a little bit. So again, this is just a visual depiction of the chart that I just showed you. And then this is just number of fish that were captured for each of the different species. But visually, it just gives you a better impression than just looking at a bunch of numbers, right? So you can see the silverside minnow in that bottom right, and the mosquito fish were over 90% of the population that were captured. Okay, and I think it was actually 91%. And then the common carp next. And then just taking that other species, the little one little slice of the orange up there on the top, and moving over to the other side, that's a depiction of those other 12 species that were captured. Largemouth bass, 4 of those, and so forth. But again, just from a big picture, silversides, mosquito fish, and carp were the most abundant fish in the lake. But when you look at biomass, that changes quite a bit, right? Because the average size of the carp that we caught was about 2 pounds, maybe on the order of, say, 12 inches or so long. But so when you look at biomass, you can see by far, carp was the most dominant the biomass of the lake. And that's just because even though we only caught 311 of them, they were so much bigger than any other fish that we caught. I think it was like 88% of the biomass in the lake was just from carp alone. Okay, so even those silversides were much more in abundance than any other species. You can see they're still only the second most as far as biomass goes, and so forth. And so just thinking about, what does this mean? Okay, we've seen what we caught today. What does that mean looking back in history at other surveys that were done in the past? Well, we're seeing kind of a shift in the percentage of the abundance of the different types of species. And the reason I say maybe on there afterwards is because these collections going back to 2002 were all collected in different methods. And in order to have a really good estimate of what's going on in trends over time, you need to be consistent in the way that you collect the fish, right? Different techniques can give you different answers, and the way that you extrapolate can give you answers as well. So looking back at 2002, they were collected through gillnet. 2003, just beach seines. And then 2008-9, hydroacoustic and electrofishing. 2015, just hydroacoustic, and then of course our 2019 survey used 3 different methods. And so you can see the different abundance of the different species across these different surveys. So going back to 2002, carp was 34%, threadfin shad were 23%, and then going into the beach seines of the 2003 survey, common carp went from 33% or 34% in 2002 to just a year later, now they're 88%. Okay, well, I think this is really due just to the way that collections were done, not necessarily an explosion of population over the course of 1 year, but just the way that collections were done and so forth. You get different estimations. Now, I think that the way that we did this study back in 2019, looking at different methods at different depths and using different techniques, gives us a more accurate assessment of what the population is, right? Because we're targeting specific habitats rather than just a single type of habitat and using that to extrapolate. All right, so moving on from the fish, I know we're kind of getting a high-level overview of what's going on here, but just moving on to the zooplankton now. They're important, right? Even though they're small and you can't really see them, they are important to the lake population because this is a lot of the smaller fish feed on. And these guys, the zooplankton, feed on the phytoplankton, which of course we all know Lake Elsinore has an algae issue, right? And so we want a large zooplankton population to feed on this algae. And so let's talk about that a bit. There's essentially 3 different types of zooplankton in the lake. There's Cladostra, which you can call water fleas, right? They're large bodied, the largest of these 3 types that we saw. There's rotifers, and there's also copepods, okay? And within those different 3 classifications, we have, these are the different species that we call within them. And so, these 3 different species, copepods and rotifers, yes, they do eat algae, but they're definitely not as efficient feeders as the large-bodied cladocerans. The cladocerans, water fleas, are much larger, they're much more efficient at eating algae, and they can even eat larger algae than these other 2 species can. But what's interesting is when you look at the population of the lake overall, and we did this collection over 3 different time periods throughout the year. We did one kind of midsummer, when it was the warmest. We did one right before the rainy season started in October, and then we wanted to do one collection during the rainy season, after we got a couple of storms and the salinity of the lake had dropped a bit to see if the population had changed. Because looking at the literature, this is typically what we saw. Looking back at some of the other studies done by UCR or UC Irvine and so forth. And so you can see that the population actually shifts based on season between these 3 different categories. During July, it's about a 50-50 split between the rotifers and the copepods. And you move into right before the rainy season, we have a shift. It's looking like we're getting more rotifers now. It's about 60-40 split. But then you see a huge shift. Once the rains start, the population shifts where now you've got almost 90% of the population is copepods. And you have a little bit of a bump up in the cladocerans. These are the water fleas that are very efficient feeders. So the largest population that you see of the cladocerans are during that winter season. And this is because the cladocerans have a connectivity tolerance, so the salinity of the lake, right? And as you get these freshwater influx into the lake, the salinity of the lake drops, which allows these these cladocerans, these water fleas, to reduce much better. They have an upper tolerance limit that Lake Elsinore typically exceeds what the upper tolerance level is for the copepods. So that's why we're not seeing a large population of these guys in the lake. What we would like to do over time is see the salinity of the lake drop to allow these guys to reproduce better, increase their populations, which can then cause them to feed on more algae and then see algae reduction. This is called a top-down biomanipulation of the lake. And we'll get into that a little bit more here in a bit. Now looking at the phytoplankton. Overall, this is just the different types of algae that we see in the lake. Overall, you're seeing the blue-green algae, which is the cyanobacteria. That's the dominant. And again, we're seeing kind of a shift across the seasonal cycles from August to October to February. Back and forth between the number of taxa that you'll see. And it's really going back and forth between the green algae and the cyanobacteria. And then in the winter, during the rainy season, you see diatoms will pop up. And that's again because you get this freshwater influx and they're more tolerant of freshwater conditions than the more saline conditions in the summertime. But what you see is that overall, even though you have this kind of a lot of different types of taxa, the overall biomass is really dominated year-round by the cyanobacteria, or the blue-green algae. So even, no matter what time of year it is, although even during the winter, you do see some bump ups of the diatom, and they tend to take up about a quarter of the population overall. Typically, it's the cyanobacteria, the blue-green algae, that just dominate the biomass year-round. So, what is getting back to this carp issue, this is one of the main objectives of the study, is do we need to do another carp removal? Is there enough carp in the lake that it's causing a water quality issue because they're stirring up the sediment to the bottom? And so that was one of the big impetuses for this whole study. So this is looking at the 2003 study that was done by another consultant, and looking at the drop in the density of the carp across their study from 2003 to 2008. This is pounds of carp per acre. So you can see back in 2003 when they started, it was up around 533 pounds of carp per acre. And by the time they had gone through their carp removal program, sending out 1.5 million pounds of carp out of the lake across that 5 years, they ended up at around 62 pounds of carp per acre. So it was very successful, right, in the way that they were able to reduce that through the reduction program. The thing you need to take into account, though, is the way that they did their population estimates. And that was, they were just doing beach staging. So they were just looking at the shallow areas of the lake and using the population that they saw in that area and assuming that you had an even distribution of carp across the lake and just extrapolating that number to across the whole lake. And so that's how they came up with their 62 pounds of carp per acre. Now, when we took our data and did the same thing, just using our beach staging data, we came up with a very similar number, 56 pounds of carp per acre. But we had to take into account that this prior estimate likely overestimated the carp because they were just using the most densely populated area. If you remember back to the table I showed you with the numbers, over 90% of the fish were caught in that shallow area. Well, that's what they were using. They were using that number to extrapolate that number, assuming that they were equally distributed across all depths, which they aren't based on our study. Look at the deep area, you have very few fish out in those deeper areas. And so when we were able to basically control for that, we came up with a number of more like 15 pounds of fish per acre based on our study. So it's more than likely that these higher numbers that you see here, everything from 500, 430, 199, 62, are probably much lower than that overall because, again, there's not many fish out in those deeper areas. And so the number that we got at 15 was actually very good, even lower than what they had gotten back in the 2003 study. So based on this number, we came to the conclusion that overall, we don't need to go through another carp removal effort, at least at this time. The carp reduction that they had done back in the 2003 seems to be still holding, right? There's not much recruitment, there's not much in the way of reproduction going on with the carp at this time that we see the need for another reduction program. So getting back to our original objectives, what are the things that we need to do moving forward to help improve the fishery in Lake LEISWA? So we came up with 5 strategies for this. The first thing is fish stocking. And so one of the fish that has been stocked here in the past, and it hasn't been done in a while, but is this thing called a hybrid bass, which is actually a hybrid between a striped bass and a white bass. Now these are fish that are highly predatory, and by doing what's called top-down manipulation, by introducing these, they're called wipers for short, white bass and striped bass together, white and stripers. This is a picture of them there in the upper right. Introducing these guys to the lake, what they do is they're highly predatory on small bait fish. And what we know about these small bait fish, specifically the silver size and the mosquito fish, of which those are the 2 top abundance fish that are caught, they like to eat zooplankton, especially larger zooplankton, where you can see better, right? So the things that they're actually preying on are the things that we need to have in the lake to help reduce the phytoplankton populations. So by increasing the population of these wipers in the lake, they will then feed upon the smaller bait fish, which feed on the phytoplankton, right? So if we can reduce the number of bait fish in the lake and come to some sort of ecological equilibrium between the wipers and the bait fish, specifically the silver sides and the mosquito fish, we can hopefully reduce their populations enough where we start to see these zooplankton populations increase to feed on the algae. If that makes sense. It's kind of, again, getting back to this whole, the whole community is kind of interrelated with each other and connected. So that was our first recommendation, do some stocking of these wipers. The second one would be to discontinue the stocking that has been done in the past of the channel catfish, the largemouth bass, the red or sunfish, because based on our studies, we saw that there wasn't really a viable reproducing population in the lake. There were some there, yes, but we didn't really see like a bimodal distribution, two different size classes of these fish in the lake, meaning that they're reproducing. We just saw one size class, okay? So we would recommend that these not be stocked in the lake. On the other hand, we would say we should continue stocking the black crappie and the bluegill, because we did see bimodal, even trimodal distributions of their length classes, meaning that there is viable reproducing populations going on in the lake of these two species specifically. Fourth, don't stock baitfish. As you saw in our study, we got a lot of baitfish, and they seem to be reproducing prolifically. So I don't think we need to do any more stocking of baitfish. And then finally, again, conduct periodic ongoing fish surveys every 5 years, every 10 years, whatever we see as reasonable, to make sure that the carp population is staying low and that we're having these viable reproducing populations of the crappie, the bluegill, and the baitfish are being maintained. So that was our basically the 5 different strategies that we'd say for the fisheries program moving forward. And with that, I'll kind of just, I know it was a very quick overview, right? We only had 25 minutes here. I don't know where I'm doing on time, but anyone have any questions on any of that? Oh, yes.
What did you do with the carp that you didn't catch?
So I didn't have time to mention it, but we did have a tagging program. And you might have seen there was one picture in the slide that I did show something like the tagging on the fish. So one of the ways that we can better estimate populations is by tagging and recapture. So every carp that we caught, we would tag and release back into the lake, hoping to recapture them at a later date, because we did the beach stains and the other side 3 times. We actually, the populations were so low of the carp, we actually never did recapture one of our tagged fish. So we're hoping maybe some fishermen will catch a carp sometime, and we'll get a call and say, hey, we caught one of your tagged fish. But no, we released, as much as we could, we released fish back into the lake. Some of the smaller silver-sized and mosquito fish are so fragile that there's really no releasing them back. But the larger fish, the bass, catfish, carp, we would release them back in.
And my other question is, do you know what the native fish were? Like, since all these are non-native?
It's hard to say. There's not a lot of historical data on that. I do know that the desert pupfish was here at one time. We also know that the lake would periodically dry up on a regular basis. Prior to the introduction of the recycled water to the lake, I think the last time that it had dried up was back in the 50s. It dried up, I think, for a 3 or 4 year period. And so obviously all the fish would be gone at that point. It would have to be reintroduced. So everything coming in from upstream would be that. So it's hard to say what's native to the lake anymore. Just in general, in California, there's not a lot of native fish left. Yes, over here and then back there.
Real quick, what's the TDS like? Are you seeing that increasing, or what's the overall trend?
Connectivity in the lake right now is around 3,500. So we are seeing an increase. Typically it increases over the summer and decreases in the winter. So if you look at a chart, you'll see it kind of creeping up over the summer and then drop during the winter, and then just kind of does this pattern over time. And so it is at about 3,500, which is above the tolerance of a lot of these larger bodied phytoplankton, as I was talking about earlier. Yeah. One question up there?
How does the hybrid bass reproduce?
They don't.
Quickly or?
Yeah, so the hybrid bass, they don't reproduce actually. They're hybridized in such a way because they're done in such a way that they don't want them to be able to be released from their population wherever they're being introduced and then take over other areas by reproducing in such a way. So they're actually, they don't reproduce at all. So they would have to be restocked on a regular basis in order to maintain the population in the lake.
Yes, John. 2 stockings.
What's that?
Hi, John. We've actually done 2 stockings of the wipers at 50,000 head per stocking.
When was the last one done?
Last July. And we have to have them certified by Fish and Wildlife, they don't reproduce, and we actually get them from vacuum. So it was a long process for us to get them. So we try to get them every year around June and July.
Introducing species to areas is something you have to be very careful about, because they can come in and take over if they escape from the area that you're stocking them into. They get into other areas, they can take over other areas. So that's why Department of Fish and Wildlife is very careful about those types of reproduction species. Yes, sir.
Question regarding the bait fish. I've also been on the fish meals for over 20 years. For the last 5 years, I've seen a reduction in redfish shad and an increase in the silver size and mosquitoes. I'm wondering what is creating that change in the bait fish, because it was predominantly a shad-based bait fish.
Yeah, shad. So we did have, like you mentioned, we have had fish kills, periodic fish kills in Lake Elsinore. Most of them have been due to low dissolved oxygen in the lake, although back in 2019, so like January of 2019, we did have a bloom of golden algae in the lake. And I forget how many tons of fish were moved. A lot of fish died because of that. A lot of the smaller fish died because of that, although we did see some carp die as well. Because golden algae produces a toxin that interferes with the yield respiration of fish, so they essentially suffocate. And so there was a big bloom in the lake back in January 2019, and I think a lot of redfish and shad died off. And then our survey for this program was that's following summer. And so, but back in 2015, there was a survey done by Dr. Anderson at UCR, and he did a hydroacoustic survey. He said 96% of the population of the lake was redfish and shad. Now, I don't know if I actually believe those numbers, because you're just looking at a hydroacoustic survey of blips on a map, and I don't know if you can tell redfish and shad from a silver side, just looking at a dot on a hydroacoustic radar. But anyway, it's possible they could have been silver sides even back then in the lake.
And maybe Chuck can attest to this, but
Right.
I fish maybe like pretty often as well. And I said all my years, you might see a small pocket of the silver side, but right now, even in Penny Lake, you're starting to see them pop up in abundant schools. And so something is going on there.
Yeah,
Whether they're coming downstream from the watershed.
Yeah, they could have come in with imported water as well. I know they're part of the California Water Project. You know, they've taken from the Colorado River other sources. They could bring in their eggs or actually live fish from these Colorado Water Projects. But then once they get introduced, they just explode when they're in the right habitat.
Would you see a problem with copper-nosed bluegill being stocked in Canyon Lake and coming downstream into Lake Elsinore?
Bluegill, you said?
Yeah, the copper-nosed bluegill. They're the bluegill that grow to 4.5 pounds.
No, not necessarily. I don't think so.
Probably do some research on it.
I have to do some research on it. I don't know. I know about bluegill in general. I'm not sure about.
They're in Lake Paris and Diamond Valley and Lake Havasu. So, for reference. The kids.
Fishermen couldn't have a problem. Any other questions?
So you mentioned fish make the nutrient providing for the world. Do you have an estimate of how much the current fish population is contributing to the nutrients in the world?
Yeah, that's a good question. She was asking what I had mentioned earlier, carp stir up the bottom, and then that sediment gets pushed up in the water column, which produces or increases nutrients in the water column with algae. And she was asking, do we have any estimate of how much that increases the nutrients? It's hard to say. I don't know if there's probably some studies out there that give us a good estimate of that. I don't know them off the top of my head, per se. So, but it is significant enough that it needs to be dealt with, for sure.
Is it possible to place structures on the ground level of the water to go ahead and try to encourage the growth and reproduction rates of more desirable fish populations?
Yeah, that's one of the things that Lake Elsinore, and I forgot to mention that during the presentation. Lake Elsinore is essentially a flat bowl, right? It's got a very soft bottom. There's not a whole lot of structure. A lot of the fish that we talked about here, specifically they're called centrarchids, which are the largemouth bass and the panfish, like the bluegill and sunfish and so forth, like structure. You know, they like tree stumps and they like rocky reefs and so forth. There's not a lot of that structure. There are a few different areas, specifically on the northeast side and then the southern edge which are areas that we did not, I should have mentioned this, they're areas that we did not sample. Because of the sampling techniques that we use, we would just tear up our nets, trying to get into these areas. So it's likely that those populations, specifically the largemouth bass and some of the bluegill and so forth, are underestimated from our survey because we didn't hit those areas where you're most likely to find them with our deer types. But yes, that would help a lot if we can get some structure out in the lake for those types of populations. I know we've probably gotten to a lot of the next presentation, so if you have any questions, I'm sitting right over here at this table. You can come ask me at the lunch break or whatever.
Thank you so much, John, for your presentation. Next up, we have Terry McNabb, who manages Aquatic, LLC. This is the alum application contractor for Canyon Lake. Aquatic specializes in the design and implementation of lake management programs. Terry is a graduate of Michigan State University, past president of the North American Lake Management Society and the Aquatic Plant Management Society. We also have Steve. Are you coming up after or together? After. Okay, Steve is with CDM Smith. He's a discipline leader for water quality and ecosystem restoration and has over 20 years of experience supporting TMDLs in Southern California. He first engaged with LEISWA in 2010 while serving as a technical lead in the development of a comprehensive nutrient reduction plan for the watershed cities and agricultural nutrient management plan for WRCAC. Steve continues to support implementation of these plans today. In 2015, Steve led the technical team charged with the development of a revised TMDL for Lake Elsinore Canyon Lake and continues to support LEISWA and the TMDL task force in the adoption process. It has been quite the process as we keep working towards that. So, welcome, Terry.
Yeah, thanks for the invitation. I appreciate the chance to be here. So I'm going to talk for a few minutes about the whys and how that they do this kind of work, and then Steve's going to come up and talk specifically about the data they've collected and the results of the project over time. So I'm going to start with a few minutes on just why you go after harmful algae blooms. This is an increasing problem all the way across the United States. The lakes are the lowest point on the watershed. Nutrients and sediment things might eventually over time migrate downhill and end up there and just accumulate. And in our case, the nutrients that drive algae growth, and I'll talk about the species shifts a bit in a minute, as lakes age and you get the nutrient levels go up, there's a species of algae called cyanobacteria or blue-green algae that actually produce toxins. They produce two acute toxins, one's a liver toxin, one's a neurotoxin, and you hear quite often about dogs ingesting water at a park and stuff, and these are pretty fast acting. They can be lethal. There's also cases across the country where a good case in New Mexico a couple of years ago where a bunch of people came out to a wilderness lake and they found 400 or 500 dead elk laying around the lake, and it was directly attributed to them ingesting these things. They also are finding that they're producing chronic toxins. There's a couple of compounds that are produced by these species of algae that are directly related to ALS or Lou Gehrig's disease. And so that's the reason you want them out of your lake, basically. So I don't know how that happened. So I just went real fast. There are a couple of reactive strategies you can use. There are EPA registered algicides that you can come in and use on a case to clean up a lake that's got one of these problems. The City of Canyon Lake's going to be looking at evaluating a couple of these over the course of the summer to see if there's any opportunity or need to use them or have a fit. Just a couple quick case studies we've been involved in. Lake Wilderness is a lake up in Washington State that had an Ironman event scheduled, and he's bringing people from all over the world. There's a swimming leg, there's a biking leg, and a marathon leg. In this case, about a week before the event, there was a cyanobacteria bloom that was producing microcystin, which is one of these toxins. They measured it. They were basically freaked out. What are we going to do? And we were able to come in with one of these peroxygen algicides on Thursday before the Sunday meet, treat the north half of the lake. The county came back and did the sampling the next 2 days, and the toxins were basically gone. So they were able to have the event. Another case is a little closer to here. Lake Silver was the terminal reservoir for the east arm of the California Aqueduct up in the mountains in San Bernardino. About 5 years ago, they had an Anabana bloom, which is one of these blue-green algae species that was producing toxins. They couldn't deliver water to 4.5 million people. So we came in and, again, did an application and cleaned it right up. So that's just to point out that there are some reactive strategies that you can use if you're in trouble and need to get out of trouble fast. We're really going to talk about here, though, is nutrient inactivation. You know, plants, algae are plants. They need nitrogen and oxygen to survive. You look at this graph, I don't know if you can read it, but on that side of the graph, at the north, the upper axis, that shows different species of algae. So those colors you're looking at there are different species. So if you're way down on that end of the scale, the bottom thing, part of that scale is actually phosphorus increasing as you go to this way. So if you're at the bottom end of that, you see you've got all kinds of different, you've got good species diversity, you've got all kinds of beneficial algae in there. And if you notice, as the phosphorus levels increase in the lake, the blue one on the bottom that you see that gets bigger and bigger and bigger, that's cyanobacteria. And these things are unique that they can fix the nitrogen they need from the atmosphere while the other algae species can't. So as your phosphorus numbers go up, the competitive advantage goes to those guys and they tend to bloom, and the more cyanobacteria you have, the more potential you have for toxin production and that type of thing. So that's kind of what the idea is there. So alum was first developed under the Clean Lakes program. When the Clean Water Act was passed in the 70s, there's a section 314 of that act that allowed researchers to go out and really look at in-lake restoration strategies, and that's where alum came from. It was developed in the 70s. We worked on a couple projects back east where some of the first alum applications were done in the country. And alum is it's a product basically that's applied to the surface of the lake. It forms a flock, and as the flock settles down through the water column, it captures anything with a negative charge. And things that are negative charge are clay particles, phosphorus molecules, and things like that. So as it's going down through the water column, it's capturing the phosphorus and stripping it out. And if it settles on the bottom, it sort of forms a blanket in the deeper water areas that catch the phosphorus that might be releasing from the sediment and going back into the lake column. So that's why it's used. So Canyon Lake, we started doing this about 10 years ago. It's a 500-acre, well, you guys know all this, it's your lake, right? It's a 500-acre reservoir. You had a TMDL set for phosphorus that had numeric targets. We won the RFP to come out and do the work, and we've won a couple since. But basically, the operation is we bring the alum in tank trucks, we put it into a boat, we have GPS control sections of the lake that based on the water depth under the boat, we run back and forth. And there you can see just a flock kind of forming after the pass is made to the boat, and that'll settle out of the water column pretty quick and take the phosphorus with it. If you think back to that graph, what you're trying to do is you're trying to push the phosphorus numbers way back to the other end of that graph where the cyanobacteria don't have a competitive advantage and where the other beneficial algae that might be an important part of the food chain can really thrive. Just another quick example of a lake up north. This is kind of similar in that they were looking at a capital cost. They had a hypomagnetic aeration system in this lake for 20 years, and about 10 years ago it failed. And they were looking at a capital cost of replacing it of about $3 million versus trying to deal with the nutrients in the lake, and their engineering groups kind of came up with the same kind of a conclusion. It would be more cost effective to come in and do in-lake phosphorus mitigation, and they've saved quite a bit of money. So it's just another quick example. Just the last few slides before I hand the mic over to Steve. In Southern California, in a lot of parts, alum, when the pH gets high, there's a couple chemical reactions that can take place that make alum a little less, it loses its ability to capture phosphorus. So if the pH in your lake is higher than, say, 8.5 to 9, you start getting up in the range where the thing crashes off and doesn't work as well. There's kind of two ways around that. One is you use a lot more alum because it's a little bit acidic and you can reduce the pH. A second technology that came along about 10 years ago in the United States is the use of lanthanum. This is something we've used pretty successfully over in Orange County and a few other spots. And the differences are lanthanum is a rare earth element, it's mined. It's applied the same way you would apply phosphorus, but when it bumps into a phosphorus molecule, it forms a new mineral called ribdiphane as it sinks, and that molecule basically is never biologically available again. And it kind of does the same thing. The big differences are, though, is it The water quality you're putting it into doesn't have any kind of impact on performance, and putting it in the water doesn't have any impact on water quality. You know, alum, if the lakes, this doesn't happen much around here, but there have been cases of fish kills from alum applications because the lakes are really soft water, and you put that much stuff in, the pH can move around to the point where you have problems. So that's just maybe a kind of a quick case study on what you would useful, maybe it's an option where you've got higher pH water. So this is a case study. It's one lake in Washington State where we work on, this is the third year we've done lanthanum applications on this lake. Same thing, cyanobacteria problems. We put a budget together, just a picture of the application going out. It goes out just like you put alum out. It kind of settles through the water column. And this is just quick results. Secchi disc is a measure of transparency. So it's a disc you lower down, and you can basically lower it down and try to see how deep you can see it. And the faster you can't see, the less stuff you have between your eye and the disc, the clearer the water is. It's kind of a measure of biomass or population. So pre-treatment, they had secchi disc readings that averaged 2 to 3 feet. After the first year of treatment, decreased pretty dramatically. Secchi disc readings were up in the 6 to 8 feet. Last summer, most of them were around 20. We had a few that were, got storm events or something right after that, but the average was about, so basically we totally cleaned up the population there. The phosphorus numbers were under 20. Well, free reactive is pretty low, and then the total phosphorus, 20 is kind of a benchmark for a clean lake, I guess, and that was able to be maintained. The hypolymnetic phosphorus, which can accumulate in the lower part of the lake below the thermocline, over the last 2 years have been dramatically reduced. The green bars you see there were the first year we treated. We did a treatment in May to strip the water column. We did a second treatment in August to capture the stuff that was building up in the lower part of the lake. The 2021, you see the blue bar there, it's still sort of the same pattern, but it's way low. And that's just kind of an end result thing. So in conclusion, basically there are tools that you can come out and deal with an emergency. There are reactive solutions that are available for use, but targeting nutrients in the lake, I think, is a real benefit in terms of effectiveness and cost effectiveness. When I was the North American Lake Management Society is a group of people like ours, and one of the things their scientists have given papers on year after year is that there's a lot of money spent in the watershed for BMPs and things like that, but a lot of times nothing changes in the lake. And so it's just a component of, this is one tool in the toolbox that gives you some options to kind of work there. So Steve, you want to take over? Maybe we'll wait for questions till he's done.
Okay. So I'll talk, I got a bunch of slides, and then maybe Terry can come back up and we get quite a few questions on that stuff, so maybe help me. It's a good segue, because you talked about the watershed, BMPs, and that's going to come up in this talk. I'm here to talk today about the alum addition program at Canyon Lake, how it came about, what it involves year to year, the effectiveness of the program, the costs, and then a little note on Lake Elsinore as well. And today I have good news, which is really nice. Sometimes these things are so complex and it just seems daunting. But in this case, we have an actual, I think, a winner. And so, without further ado, we'll jump right in. The history of the program. So back in 2011, C.M. Smith got involved working with Riverside County for control in this watershed cities, as well as RACAC, the agricultural community, on building TMDL implementation plans. And so these plans are nutrient plans for the watershed to reduce nutrient loads to downstream lakes to meet the allowable loads set in the TMDL. And in that process, we're building upon work that was done in the mid-2000s, looking at the idea that you can actually reduce the water quality, or improve the water quality through in-lake controls, right? So we wanted to incorporate a hybrid of both watershed controls and in-lake controls with these nutrient management implementation plans. And at that time, two different controls were looked at. HOS, which is the hypolymnetic oxygenation system. You heard Terry talk about the one that failed. I didn't realize that was going to be a nice setup. And the idea also of using alum or some other chemical addition to reduce the phosphorus within the lake. And there was pros and cons to each one, and we went through this process and decided at the end that an alum program would be something you can jump right into, as opposed to having the capital upfront cost of the Haas system. And then you could always come back down the road and build the Haas if need be. And so part of the alum program is, is the aluminum that comes with the alum going to be toxic to the fish? And so there was an entire toxicity study done by my ex-boss's company GI, who's here, Richard Meyer Hop, and they found safe dosing levels for Canyon Lake to make sure that the fish would be safe. And then we were awarded a grant to jumpstart the program back in the 2018 period. So you'll see a lot of graphs coming up that really kind of look at before alum and after alum. And what we're talking about is 2013, September was the first application. This is a little bit of a review of what Terry was talking about, but essentially the alum is spread across the top of the lake. It settles through the water column, forms a plaque, strips the phosphorus out of the water, and then continues to work within the lake bottom. Less phosphorus, you get less algae, you get a healthier lake. And there's success apparent after 9 years worth of implementation. One thing, a lot of times you'll see an alum application that's a single application, and that's where you put a larger dose in, and you're really trying to focus on the bottom, the internal load. This program that we have in Canyon Lake is different. It's a routine, ongoing program. And so we're doing lower doses, but more frequently every year. And so that's what makes it a little bit different. So here we have the seasonal applications. Every year we do an application at the end of the wet season. And the reason there is during the rainy season, we get a lot of watershed loads of nutrients coming into the lake. That loads up the lake with the higher nutrient concentration. As soon as the sun starts getting heated up, you see this February, March algae bloom. And historical data shows that, so the idea is to intervene prior to that bloom. The second application happens in the fall. And so over the course of the dry season, we have a stratified lake. There's an internal load of phosphorus coming into the water column, but it's being held back in the deeper waters because we don't have a mixed lake at that point in time. As the air and the water get cooler in the fall, there's a turnover. And when that turnover happens, we see a release of this bottom water into the full water column, and it can spawn a new algae bloom. And we've seen that in historical data. So the idea is to add the alum prior to the turnover to prevent it from getting into the surface where there's light to feed the algae. And so we had these dosages that, we had models back in the original TMD implementation that suggested these dosages would bring enough phosphorus reduction. And so what we do is we simply, every 6 months or so, I talk to Terry and DACA and the task force, and we coordinate, we look at the lake levels, and we say what amount of alum we need to order for the delivery. And so here's just some pictures of what it would be at the maximum if we had a full lake. And so each year we take a look, it's a little bit lower if the lake is not at full levels, but this is the amount of gallons of slurry that are being dropped off the lakeshore and then spread out. So here's a picture. So I said we've been doing this for 9 years, right? And so if it's twice per year for 9 years, we're looking at 17 applications. And so I'm going to see 17 different combinations of a before alum and after alum concentration of phosphorus in the lake. And you can see every single time we see a reduction. We have red is before, and then the blue is after. And this is not even looking at it immediately before, immediately after. It's, a month before whenever Wood goes out and does their routine sampling, we always time it accordingly. But still, there's, periods of time where other rain can come in, other things can happen. And yet we still see this improvement on a consistent basis. Another line of evidence says that the alum program is working. When you look at the ratio of nitrogen to phosphorus, those are the two major nutrients that algae need to grow. The perfectly balanced diet would be 7 milligrams of nitrogen for 1 milligram of phosphorus. And then you get, both nutrients could be controlling the growth. If you're under 7, that would mean you have plenty of phosphorus and your nitrogen is controlling the growth. And historically, actually, despite what folks think about freshwaters, Canyon Lake was somewhat nitrogen limited, which is interesting because the phosphorus in this watershed is thought to be naturally high. And so that would kind of be another line of evidence. So one of the things we're trying to say with regard to the TMDL revision, that phosphorus is naturally high and the same is in the watershed. But that's another story. So we take a look at all the data Wood collects over many years. Before 2013, very low nitrogen phosphorus ratios. After 2013, a substantial shift in the ratio of nitrogen to phosphorus. So we see that phosphorus is now the controlling nutrient by far, and that any reduction in phosphorus will translate to a reduction in algae in the lake. More good news. Here's some more pictures of, well, what about the algae in the lake? How has it changed? And so here's just a few graphs. The brightest from the Woods Monitoring Report from 2021, and they're very nice to include all of the data going back to 2001. So you can see concentrations of algae, every single sample collected. You have East Basin in the red, so we know we often see higher concentrations in the East Basin. And then blue is the main body of the lake. And you can see since 2013, the conditions have come down quite a bit from a period where it was quite hot, especially when we were first getting involved with the CNR feed development in the 2010, 11, 12 time frame. When you look on the left, the TMDL numeric target is an annual average chlorophyllite concentration. And so it's 25 micrograms per liter. And when you take an annual average over the past, I guess, since the program, I know we got all the way back to 2011, you can see that that has been coming down slowly. And in fact, over the past 3 years, it's been now below the target. So this is part of our compliance demonstration in December of 2020. Provided a demonstration, and in a lot of ways we're meeting both the numeric target as well as the goal allocation. And I believe that's what we're going to talk about next. Oh no, one more slide on cost effectiveness. So, Terry, you mentioned this. The cost effectiveness of the alum program is stark. So if you had to treat the same amount of nutrients with watershed controls, you're probably looking at about 10 to 50 times the price per pound of phosphorus removed. And maybe those don't always work so well. And so the alum program allows us to know we're getting rid of the phosphorus in the lake, and it also allows the water to go downstream, which is really important for this lake. Yeah, this one always jumps out at me. So it's a great deal to be able to use this program, and it's really critical to be able to continue to use this program. This is a slide that says basically, sometimes when you look at each 17 years and those blue lines and the red bar and the blue bar, right, you'll see that the reduction is kind of muted in the years where phosphorus is extremely low at the beginning. So you're basically adding alum on top of a pretty clean lake. And so the idea that you can remove a lot is not really, there's not a lot of opportunity to remove a lot. And so going through it year to year, the idea that you can skip the spring application, and we've done that one in 10 times, so, depending on conditions at the beginning, at the end of the wet season. And so we put this together for the task force to help that decision process. And every year it's like a process. You know, it depends on how much rain comes, depends on what the turbidity in the lake is going to be like, depends on, you know, whether we get a lot of warm weather and the wet season. But we can go through this process to make a decision. In fact, we just did, we went through this process. We almost did not apply alum last week, but then we decided to apply alum. So, we probably got back to this drawing board next year around this time. So, the amount of phosphorus that is removed by the alum from a mass standpoint is really important for the watershed cities and all the dischargers, the ag community to understand so that they can appropriately take credit for the reduction. And so what we've done is jar tests back in 2012 at the very start of the test. Part of the jar test was to look at, you know, the toxicity of fish, but the other part was to look at how much phosphorus is being removed for the amount of alum that's being added to in the lab experiment. And then we compare those to the literature values and see within the range that you might expect. And so what we've come up with, and it's a conservative number, is that for every 150 kilograms of alum that we apply, we're removing 1 kilogram of phosphorus. I've seen numbers as low as 6 or 10, and so as aluminum. So 6 or 10 as aluminum, which would be like 15 for alum. And so this number is very conservative. We're probably getting more. But when we take that number and we apply it to the amounts that we have carried spread across the lake, we can compute the phosphorus removed at each application. You see 17 or 19, I guess it's 17 applications so far. In the dark, you'll see the fall applications and how much is removed from those. And in the light colored blue, you see the spring. We use a slightly higher dose in the fall because we have a lot more concern with regards to that internal load and stripping that out at the end of the dry season. So the next slide, what we do is we take those 2 applications per year and sum them up to an annual. So the annual reduction of phosphorus that's achieved is the sum of the fall and spring, obviously. And that varies year to year based on water levels or how we're just sort of ordering different amounts, but not drastically. And that's part of the benefit of this program. We can budget for it year to year by having kind of a somewhat consistent amount of alum applying. And the removal that translates to is about 2,000 kilograms per year of phosphorus. And that is offsetting all of the excess nutrient loads that are coming to Canyon Lake from the watershed as we've documented in our 2020 compliance report. It was uncanny how close it was. And if you guys on the Southwest remember, we said we're on the razor's edge. But it's just, we have, Garth from Alta is here, goes out, collects data coming into the lake, like year after year after year. We have just a massive amount of stormwater data coming into the lake. We compute the mass and then compare it to what's allowed, and it's about 2,000 kilograms more than is allowed. And so we can claim that we're compliant from the standpoint of the waste load allocation as well as the CMDO in that target. So good news. And then there's even more good news. So alum is applied to Canyon Lake only when there's no overflow of lake elsewhere. That was very clear. The task force did not want to waste alum applied to Canyon Lake and then have it march to Lake Elsinore, and then where there's higher pH, it wouldn't work as well. It wouldn't fit the strategy for Lake Elsinore. But at the same time, you have to think about the fact that you're improving the phosphorus levels in Canyon Lake significantly. So when you have a storm that's going to cause a spill, it mixes with the water that's in Canyon Lake, and then that's what's spilling. So by improving the phosphorus levels in Canyon Lake, we're actually improving what's spilling over to Lake Elsinore. And there's the good news, where when you look at before alum, the overflows from Lake Elsinore, the the picture, the ULs all see the dam and the overflow. Used to be 0.57 milligrams per liter of phosphorus on average, and now it's down to 0.22, so it's more than a 50% reduction in the transfer load from 90% of the watershed that is upstream of Canyon Lake. So for Lake Elsinore, there's an improvement. And that's basically what I got. The routine low-dose alum additions are working to what we say is meet ULE compliance. The alum in Canyon Lake has also had notable benefits to Lake Elsinore. And then the final point here is, you know, a little bit of my soapbox, but alum additions are used to offset the watershed loads within the lake. So we allow the water to get downstream where we can then treat it more confidently, but we're also taking advantage of that stormwater by, you know, it's a supply, right? So we're having more water supply for the city UAs that we need to use at their water treatment plant. And then we're actually increasing the amount of fresh water, which is what John was talking about, how important fresh water is to Lake Elsinore. We're getting more fresh water still over the dam by not holding back the stormwater in the watershed. And so that is my final conclusion. Do you want to go up there and have any questions?
So I think Tara mentioned that pH affects the effectiveness and all application. Have you seen changes in pH in the lake from the 20 years of our applications?
In Canyon Lake, I'm not I haven't looked at that lately.
It seems like it's, when we cut it twice a year, it seems like it's always worked. They tell us that, so it's been pretty constant the years we've been cutting. There's 2 data points per year.
Yep.
One of the things that over the years, we have a lot of problems because of the construction and the levee has increased tremendous home and so on and so forth. A little over 10 years ago, we had a Caribbean project. In fact, Bill Williams and I, because we were on the LEISWA board, started. And we took out about a third on the East Bay. One of the problems is what do you do with the material because the nitrogen content is so high that you can't put it any place because it kills the trees or whatever you're trying to plant there. So we had to treat dredging material in order to get rid of it. The other big problem, when we first started, we had copper sulfate. You replaced that with the alum. Copper sulfate was worse than what was happening tonight. But it amazed me because we took a survey and the amount of soil we took out, which is approximately a third of the East Bay, is completely filled up today. Coming down from the construction of the homes and so on in Meadow. We have a hard time keeping up because when you lower the water, it creates a problem with the algae. And we're going to have to dredge sometime in the near future. But my question is, what do we do with all the nitrogen-loaded material that you're developing by putting the alum in and dropping everything to the bottom of the lake?
That's a good question. And I know the capacity of the lake is significantly reduced since the dam was built, but even in recent years. So, you know, dredging just from the standpoint of capacity is probably something that's out there in the future. And then what to do with the material. I don't know if you have any thoughts there.
We've done some operational dredging projects, and that's usually what limits you. It's not so much, there's a little bit of a cost to what's going on with the material, but 9 times out of 10 you can't put it anywhere, right? So hydraulic dredging is basically the most effective way to go. So you have to build a settling pond somewhere, you have to pump the dredge spoils there, you have to return the water, and then you have to get rid of them. A place like Canyon, there's no place to throw the pond for the dredge spoils, right? So that gets to be a problem. So but your question was more about the phosphorus that's accumulated in the sediments?
Well, yeah, like I say, we're definitely going to have the drugs in the future. Either that or these people are completely useless. And one of the things that I talked with we have a committee that's working on that. And one of the things we thought would be to recrock the stream coming in and pumping the nitrogen loaded material on the north side of the location, which at the present time is used for just a park or something like that. We're not worried about what's actually being developed. It's where do you put the material. And by recrocking that stream, it created a huge area that we could pump it into. You're not involved with hauling, which is a tremendous expense. Plus, even hauling, where you're going to haul it to. But this way, all you're doing is putting the stack where it came from. That's our approach to it, and we'll continue to do that. But what I'm wondering is, is there any other treatment as the depth of the water gets less and less?
I don't know what to say. I guess one of the things I just quickly say is there's been a couple of papers at a couple of meetings I've been recently where people are starting to calculate that the world's going to run out of phosphorus in maybe 50 years. Phosphorus is required to grow crops, right? And that's why it's a minor material. We're looking at the reserves around the country. So I think more and more research and people are going to have to start looking at how do you instead of just capturing this phosphorus and get it out of the lake, how do you bring it back and do something else with it? There are companies that are starting to use some of these filtered bags you put in a stream that catch the phosphorus and as you go by, and then you can take those out and use them as a crop or a soil amendment. You're going to see more and more of that in the future just because phosphorus is going to get more expensive and more scarce.
Well, it's going to take a lot of negotiating with 3 or 4 different people. We're very fortunate to have an excellent relationship. I think Murphy, the Army Corps of Engineers, and Elsinore. I worked with Phil for years. We came over in 1812. But it was, anyway, we hope to find a solution because it is going to be a major problem.
Good dialogue. Any other questions?
Thank you so much, gentlemen. So I know we're a little over time here, but don't worry, we have a plan. We're going to go ahead and break for lunch in just a minute here, but of course I'm going to take a couple minutes to build on what they were just sharing with you today, and then we're going to go ahead and get lunch early. Marissa Van Dyke, she's a senior scientist with the State Water Resources Control Board. She's based up in Sacramento. She couldn't be here today, after all, and so good news. You just get that one. But we do have a recorded version for all of you, and we will email that out along with all the other PowerPoints. But coming off of that presentation, I just wanted to take a moment to talk to you about why we had harmful algae blooms on the list for today, and share a little bit about some of the stuff the city is doing to address our water quality. you know, the work that's being done in Canyon Lake is tremendous. It's actually making a difference. It's working, right? And so we oftentimes in Lake Elsinore get a lot of people coming and going, we can fix your lake. This is how. Just let us do this and apply this, and it's gonna work. We go, okay, sounds really good, but it's $50 million and we don't know for sure. So, as fiduciary leaders, we can't just say yes to that, right? So what Lake Elsinore is doing this summer is a Prop 1 grant we received from the state with the support of LEISWA and SAPA. We're going to be doing a pilot study to look at different types of algae removal techniques for Lake Elsinore. And this is going to be a study that allows us to evaluate all these options people have approached us with. So that RFQ is out there currently. The deadline is May 20th. This effort will be done in coordination and collaboration with Carrie as well as Wood. So we're really excited about it because it's going to let us look at Lake Elsinore specifically to come up with some solutions like this that we're finding that are successful in Canyon Lake. It's just the first step though, because we know from here, we then have to determine what does that really look like to do that lake-wide. You know, Lake Elsinore is 3,000 acres in size. There's not a lot of lakes that are this size. And the reality is for us to resolve our algae and nutrient concerns for Lake Elsinore, it's probably 20, 30, 40 years from now. I might still be around, but I hope most of us are retired and enjoying life. But at that point, it's going to be a lot of money, a lot of time, and a lot of partnerships to get there. And so it's encouraging to have you all here today to share that we're just starting that journey and looking forward, what will that be? And I know dredging was brought up, and I want to take a moment to recognize Daria in the audience. And she's speaking later at 12:30, and I really encourage you to stick around for her presentation because this is also a big step that we've taken to partner with the Army Corps of Engineers on a project here in Lake Elsinore. And this was really brought forward by the Elsinore Valley Municipal Water District, and I want to recognize them for bringing this opportunity to the table, engaging the Corps to get involved. And if you don't know, the Army Corps of Engineers are the people that dredge. Right? They are the masters of dredging. And what's really exciting about this project that we've embarked on with them is it's not going to give us an answer per se on dredging, but it's creating an opportunity to explore that option for Lake Elsinore, even possibly Canyon Lake. And whether there's other alternatives to that or not, it's opening those doors. And I want to thank Daria for that because she's allowed us to have those conversations with her teams across the United States to really look at what dredging could look like for Lake Elsinore. This leads me to then, again, harmful algae blooms, which is what Marissa was going to speak on. And harmful algae blooms are known as blue-green algae, cytotoxins. You've heard it said in various different ways today. And as some of you remember, in 2016, Lake Elsinore got to its lowest levels in 20 years. We were at 1232. We want to be at 1240. That was in the midst of our last drought. We're in a drought currently. And that's concerning for us as managers of a lake, because what is going to happen to our lake levels? As the lake level declines, all of these nutrients spike up because you have less water, right? And so then we see these large-scale algae blooms that we saw in 2016, and these blooms forced us to close the lake for the first time for a full week. And that's troubling when we have a recreational water body, because this lake is right in the middle of our city. It is surrounded by homes, by businesses, our economy, this wonderful campground. And so as we think about what the future of harmful algae blooms look like, we have to recognize that the state, probably very soon, is going to be looking at regulating harmful algae blooms. What does that mean for Canyon Lake and Lake Elsinore? That means that our lakes could be closed. That means that could affect our economy. That means it could affect our entire region. And I bring this to all of our attention because they are doing a HAB study on Lake Elsinore currently, the Regional Water Quality Control Board, and they also are doing one in Big Bear. And they're doing these because they're trying to understand how to address these blooms and the health effects that they can have. They're also stating that harmful algae blooms can actually be airborne now, and that the toxins associated could be a challenge or a health risk in that regard. And really it's important for us to all be engaged in that conversation, because as we know, as any regulation comes out, it doesn't usually come with any money. It just comes with challenges. And so I encourage you to watch Marissa's presentation. This is one of the reasons why the city went after the Prop 1 grant, because we really knew that we needed to find solutions solutions, both in a reactive way, as Terry was mentioning today. He mentioned a run and the importance of cleaning the algae out because you have an event. There may be a time in the very near future where our lakes are closed. A lot of water bodies across the state can be closed and forced to treat the water with these reactive solutions to get them reopened. But also, obviously, the bigger and longer term goal is to do the proactive, more long-term strategies of removing the nutrients, because then you would avoid the blooms to begin with, right? So that's why these are so important in terms of the future of this watershed. And I just encourage you to stay engaged on harmful algae blooms. Encourage you to be looking for opportunities for us to address them locally, because they will be a challenge for us in the future, and they are rising to the top. Yes.
Well, my comment is we have a pretty good understanding of our water bodies. If the state comes down with rules, it's not like we will have no idea what to do, because we have so much research. And if they come down with the standard, we're not starting at the bottom. We have done a lot of the base work. So I don't want it to come across that, anything can happen and it all goes away, we have no idea what to do. No, we've spent a lot of time, money, and energy to understand what our problem is.
Yes, as Dale was mentioning, the good thing is we have this group, we have all of the research, the studies, the data, the projects we've already implemented that allow us to be better prepared. And then how do we use that though, right, to help influence what those future regulatory moves may be for us, and what does that mean for us? Yeah, we're absolutely at an advantage there. That's one of the reasons we're doing the algae study for us. Obviously with Canyon Lake having the alum, that helps a lot. The cyanobacteria, Canyon Lake's had a few blooms as well there. So it's not just Lake Elsinore, it's across the state. And so we're excited for that study. We hope to be engaged in that regard. And again, please stick around for the presentation by Daria, because I think you'll enjoy some of the stuff we're doing in that project as well. So with that, I think we're good to break for lunch. I'm looking for Lizelle. So she left. I think we're good to break for lunch, but obviously we're going to have lunch out on the patio in terms of grabbing it. We ask that you come back in with your lunch, and then we're going to have a very fun tutorial on fishing. We thought we'd have a little fun. Sometimes these presentations can get a little boring, right? There's only so much science we can all handle in a day, and so we thought, why not bring some fun into the mix? And so today we have two gentlemen here to share their love for our lakes in a different way, and that's through fishing. So the first person I want to introduce is William Johnson. William is a friend of mine for many, many, many years, long before even the city, but he's trying to convince me to get into fishing. He tried to make me put my finger in the fish's mouth, and I was like, absolutely not, that's not something for me. I'll just lay on the boat and we have fun. So I've given up on that hobby for myself, but William himself, he lived in Lake Elsinore for 24 years. He started fishing in Virginia at the age of 4 years old with his dad. The passion just kept increasing as he got older. He says his favorite spot to look for fish is anywhere that there is water. That's pretty good. Drought situation. But when he's fishing in Lake Elsinore, he typically likes fishing on the north and northwest end of the lake, which I think you heard is where some of the structure is. This angler is semi-retired, lucky. But recently, he ran and owned the bait and tackle shop and the Bobber restaurant right here at Moss Point. And I'll say, William has always been known as the coffee king. And I said that wrong on the radio once. It's not crappy. He fell in love with Lake Elsinore as his first night here. His dad took him to a place called Lookout Point, overlooking the city and the lake. Has anyone been there? Up in Ortegas? He was captivated by the beauty. He loves the diversity and pride within the people of Lake Elsinore, and he shares that the leadership of the city is second to none. So it's my pleasure to introduce William. Also, I want to invite up Chuck Moreno, who's been a resident of Canyon Lake since 2004. He recalls visiting the lake as a young boy and fell in love with the unique community. He jokes that he started fishing at 1 year old. That's pretty crazy. Which may be true. He enjoys fishing just about anything. He said salt or freshwater, bass or trout. And as an entrepreneur and a business owner of a low voltage contractor at AC Communications, Chuck says there's no other place like Canyon Lake on Earth. I think that's probably true. One of his highlights each year is helping organize the Canyon Lake Kids Derby. He is presently the president of the Canyon Lake Bass Masters and has served in various leadership positions over the years. So please welcome Chuck Moynihan.
Fishing 101. First of all, thank you for having me here. It's always been a pleasure to be over my years of fishing in Southern California to be a part of what's happening from a water quality standpoint. Lake Elsinore being a natural lake is of utmost importance about the water. But the first thing about fishing, get yourself to the water. All of you guys working in water fishing, if I show up here and think the last time you've been to a body of water, in the city. That's sad. That is sad. But anyway, Lake Elsinore. Lake Elsinore does have its challenges. But at the right time of the year, and that time of the year will be any time between February all the way through September into October, you can catch fish in this lake with relatively amount of ease if you know what you're doing. John gave you pretty much 80% of what you need to know when you come to Lake Elsinore. Almost all the fish are caught in 0 to 8 foot of water. So don't go down to the lake and throw out 100 yards. But that's what all of us want to do. Right there at the edge of the shore, all these fish are hanging. Target areas, Launch Point is great. It's probably the most structurous place on the whole lake. You can't see it, but right next to the launch ramp, there's a shoal of rocks, about 150 foot long, underneath the water. But that rock shoal is probably 8 feet off the water. Water's edge. Just make a little cast over that. With my favorite toy, this is my crappie stick. With this rod right here, I target crappie, bluegill, red ear, carp. That little floaty, that's a bobber. Very, very helpful. Notice when you're catching panfish or even bass. This will actually keep your bait from hitting the bottom and getting caught in all the rocks that you're going to be fishing. So when it hits, this bobber will stand up like this. You can either put the jig on this and you kind of work it almost like tick, 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 stop. So the whole time you're doing that, this is what that jig is doing. Tick, 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 tick. It looks like a wounded bait fish down there to the predatory fish. But if you move it like tick, 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 you're basically just flying the bait past that fish, and you don't give them time to strike it and bite it. So it's just like a little tick, 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 and stop it. The whole time you stop it, the undercurrent and everything is making that little thing just wiggle around, and fish will just pop it. And when it hits, when it strikes, your bobber will do like this. Bloop. That's all you're gonna see. Most people, when they fish with bobbers, they want that bobber to just disappear. Most fish with bass, crappie, panfish, all you're gonna see is doop. And that's them sucking at the jig in its mouth. The minute you see that, just snap on your tip and reel in. The most important thing with any fishing rod is this. That's why you drag. Most of us, when we go to the lake, we pull the rod out of the garage, and we don't even do this. But I can barely pull that. When you get a big fish on that line, he hits it, it's gonna just go snap. So most rods, this little adjustment on the top, just turn it until we can just pull it with your hand, real gently. You won't believe how much pressure that puts on that fish trying to swim away. It's almost like him trying to pull a tennis ball through the water attached to his tail. That's how much putting on you're putting on. And that slows the fish down. That does all the fight for you. So whether you get a small fish or a big fish, you let this do all the work. You basically, you get a strike, pull it in. If he starts pulling line, don't be, oh my God, oh my God, oh my. No, just let him. Just let him. And look, you're laughing because all of us has been in that point. Oh God, I got a good one. And we're reeling like this, and we're reeling like this, and we're reeling like this, and we're reeling like all of a sudden, shh. No, you just put too much pressure on that fish. Line test. I typically, well, Lake Elsinore, when fishing for panfish, 4-pound test. That's typically the rule of thumb. Lake Elsinore, do not fish Lake Elsinore with nothing less than 6-pound test line. And there's a reason for that. Everything in this lake will hit this jig. The bass, the crappie, the bluegill, the carp even, largemouth bass, wipers, which we know we got in. I've caught wipers in this lake almost 20 pounds. Yeah, the first donkey, some 12, 13 years ago. 20-pound wipers. Right now, they're catching them in the 14 to 16 inch range, but they get up to 20 pounds. But when one of those white bass hits your line and you got your drag tight, this is what's gonna sound like when one of those wipers hits your line. You know it immediately. That's exactly what it's gonna sound like. And he ain't gonna stop. Feel me up? Hey, the hooks work. But 6-pound test for panfish and basically anything. But this is the panfish rod. Next thing is largemouth bass. Largemouth bass, we have stained water in Lake Elsinore. If you're a bass fisherman or you learn to like bass fisherman where you want to get the kid out there, which I highly advise, bring your kids out there. If you want something to just have them throwing out there and reeling back, because most kids, even me at 4 years old, when I went out there, you couldn't keep me from it. You got to throw it out there and leave it, son. So you got to throw it out there and leave it. No, but for bass fishing, and that's considered light tackle. If you want to go to the store and buy yourself some ultralight, that's what you're going to be looking for, ultralight spinning. This is my bass stick. This is called a Baitcaster. And you use these for bass that pretty much, you want something with a little strength in it. You know, so when that bass hits it, you can pull them out of any structure or anything like that and then fight them. But like the same thing, the most important thing is this drag. See how that's really tight? Last time I used this, I was in the ocean, fishing for spotted bass, and they're down the structure. And you gotta have that drag kind of tight. But that's about all you need right there. Bass fishing in Lake Elsinore, you can, I say use something called a reaction bait. A spinner bait, this is called a spinner bait. And basically when you're reeling this, these blades behind it, they're flashing. And it's mimicking or giving the sound or the vibration of a school of fish. And because we have stained waters here, most of the bass in Lake Elsinore, they strike by movement. A lot of times they don't know what they're hitting, but they know the sound that the bait makes. And so when something goes past them, it's, oh, that sounds like a wounded bait fish. They'll hit it. And also this color, yellow and white, anything with white is good for Lake Elsinore in the stained water. But basically you just throw this out as far as you can throw it, typically along the shoreline, horizontal, not straight out. But just think about this, anytime I'm fishing for crappie, with the exception of catfish, crappie, bass, bluegill, anything. If you throw straight out, you only give yourself this much window of catching a fish. But if you throw straight down the shoreline in 3 to 5 foot range, now you got a whole corridor of strike zone that you can potentially get bit. Does that make sense? You know, so think about that when you're out there fishing. You want to be in the right zone. You know, but so this coming through the water and it's just fluttering, bass is gonna hit it, and you ain't gonna get that little kink. When you're reeling through the water, that rod is just gonna go zoom. It's like you got caught a rag in the water, and then that rag is gonna take out running. And that's why I love fishing reaction baits, because you just really, all of a sudden, it's like you just stuck and you know it's a fish. I said the spinnerbait is good for Lake Elsinore.
Still 6 pound line?
With the bass fishing, I would jump up to 8 to 15 pound test. Minimum. And if you look at my line here, you see that green? And you see that as white? This is braided line. You know, as you get more, and you don't have to use this, but as you get more advanced into fishing, you come to find out braided line has almost 3 times the regular strength as this line and probably half the diameter. So that means we can put more line on our reel, and then we just tie on what is called a top shot, which is either fluorocarbon line or monofilament line as a leader. But the fish will see this. They'll see this line here, but they won't see this little clear part attached to it. But we maximize our line capacity and our strength by using braid. And this is something that really became pretty prevalent, let's say, the last 8 to 10 years. Oh, yeah. The guys started using braid when they figured out they can get a lot more line on your reel and double your power. You know, when I'm ocean fishing, everything, all my reels have braid and then a top shot.
And the braid you don't have to replace as often as mono.
Yes.
Braid will last, I got reels that I keep on for a year until it gets all ratty looking, I don't change it out.
Yeah, if there is a downside, braid doesn't sink as well as this. But when you throw a reaction bait, you don't care if it sinks. The weight of this lure is going to pull it down, and basically you just reel it through the water. But so you got spinner baits, and these are crankbaits. You see these all in Walmart and all of them. You say, oh, they don't catch fish. They catch fish. And basically, this is in the crawdad pattern, which is good for Lake Elsinore, because we do have crawdad. But basically what this does, and remember, you don't want to throw out deep. They come in different strike zones. So this one is a 1 to 5 foot diver. They make them from 3 to 7 foot divers, meaning that's how deep they'll go in the water if you reel that reel. But you want something in probably 3 to 5 foot deep diving range. And basically this is going to hit the bottom and go through the water and hitting the dirt like this. And it's going to be pounding. And any nearby fish is going to, oh man, something's going on over there. They're going to come and investigate. And if you ever watch a fishing show, they will actually see the bass chasing this, you know, as it's going through the water like this, and it hits them. You know, but a lot of times with these, once you stop, it starts to float up. And so you can crank this, you know, then pause it, and it starts to hit up. And sometimes you get a thump, you know, or another time they just want to move it fast. But this is basically to cover a lot of water and create a strike in low visibility water, and sometimes even high visibility. But Lake Elsinore, this darker color here, the fish can see it. So you want something that's banging the bottom of the water, creating a noise and alerting the bass. I suggest something that this is called a crawdad pattern, and the other one is Joe can put this right here. So we've heard that the most prominent bait fish in the lake, remember fishing, you want to kind of match the fish is the shad and the threadfin. These are the primary colors of those fish, black and silver. So you want something to kind of mimic, you know, the bait that they used to be hitting. You know, also something in a lot of these crankbaits and even rattle traps. If I just shake this, this is going through the water and making that noise. And the fish hear that, and it's like a dinner bell for them. Yeah, so that's for bass. And I could go a lot more extensive, but I'm giving you basically the basics right now. You know, this is for yourself if you're a bass fisherman. You know, I wouldn't recommend putting this on for a kid, because if you don't know what you're doing and you don't understand the structure that you're fishing in, these will get caught pretty rapidly, more so than a spinnerbait. Spinnerbait is almost a dummy lure. I can throw a spinnerbait through sticks, trees, stumps, rocks, and whatever, simply because they don't get stuck. You see how the hook is pointed up and back? So when it's going through the water, it's like this. It doesn't get caught if it was turned around that way. So basically, you know, I love throwing spinnerbait, and I've caught probably 80% of the bass in Lake Ocean on a spinnerbait. But it's a lot of fun just going to the water's edge and just throwing and making casts. All right, that's bass, and then I'm going to go for bulldog of freshwater, catfish. This is a typical catfish rod, and this is considered a medium heavy rod, meaning that if you feel that the backbone right here is pretty stiff when you do it, that means that it's going to take a big fish, you know, to number one, bend it over, but it gives you a lot more pulling strength when you're fighting a big fish. Typical line test for catfish, I fish anything from 6 to 12 pound tests. Me, I just do 6 pound tests simply because I know that I can fight a big fish. Average, I would say don't start with them. If you're a novice, just start with 8 pound test line, 10 pound test. Catfish, they don't care about the line. You literally can throw 30 pound test line, but you're not going to cast it that far. 8 to 10 pound test line. Size hooks, that's a pretty good hook, but it's either 1/0, 2/0, or 3/0, not a number 3. When you're talking hooks, the smaller hooks are numbered. When you're talking bigger hooks, you see 1/0. So you get a 1/0, 2/0, or 3/0. And that's so you can put a big old piece of mackerel on the end of this, or even a night crawler. Hint, when you're fishing with night crawlers, do not take that night crawler and hook it through the top of him and wrap him around like this on your hook and then do that. No, start from his butt or his head, whichever one you want to call it, is what it is. And feather him up like this and run him all the way up to here. Just run that hook all the way up through there into where he's hanging off the back end like this. Because what's going to happen when you throw this out there, that tail is going to be under the water doing like this the whole time, you know. But if you just got it wrapped up in a glob, you know, yeah, your chances of the catfish really, that catfish, they hit pretty much by smell. Although they smell through their whiskers, you know, and they can sense vibration. I've had catfish spinning, the crankbaits, the lures as well. But typically with the catfish, you just want to bait fish it and get it all tangled up here. Well, you can attest to this. I don't know, sometimes I don't know how a line can get so tangled with so little movement. But you see this? This is, all you need is a hook and a weight. This is called a slip sinker. And there's a reason why I use the slip sinker. So most of us, you know, they'll come out, they'll tie either a swivel, which is what you hook the weight onto, and then they'll put a hook. So all of that's connected together. The weight, the hook, the bait, all of it's connected together. Well, people don't think so, but a lot of catfish, they are kind of sensitive to resistance. Meaning that if they hit something and they just can't pull it away without feeling some weight other than the natural thing that they're hitting, sometimes they'll let it go. But also, it also puts them in a place where if they hit your bait and it's all connected and they swim away, it basically just pulls the bait right off of the hook because of that back weight. But with this right here, and I'll show you, just lay that on the ground, and if you grab that hook,
Did you grab that?
yeah, I'm not going to set it up. So you'll see that as he pulls that hook, the sinker doesn't move. And what that does, that allows the fish to pull line without feeling the weight of that sinker attached to it. Another key thing is when I catfish, Most of the time, it's gonna, you can throw it out there, you're gonna sit. And I'll have a rod holder. I'll put that in the rod holder, and I will flip this over. This is called your bell. You flip that over, and just put it in what we call freeze fall. And so what's gonna happen is, when that fish starts taking line, you'll see your line doing this. It might look just exactly like this, and stop. The fish just picked up your bait, swam a little bit. Then you see it do this, and stop. He's still just sitting there gnawing on it. And then after about 5 or 10 seconds, you'll see it doing this. He's got it, and he's gone. Basically, put it in gear, rod tip down like this, and the minute that line tightens up straight, just lift that, and he's hooked. It's that simple. You don't have to sit there and come up with a fish head with no body. These are all, the things I'm telling you are all things that I've done in my life. I'm trying to give you tips that's gonna, number one, allow you to catch fish, but number two, catch them and land them. Yeah, and a lot of times fishing, it isn't just about landing a fish. A lot of times, when I go with my sons, which both my sons, crazy fishermen right now, I've taken them out fishing. Nick at age 2 and Seth at age 6. A lot of you in this room know my sons, particularly my oldest son, Nicholas. And when I tell you that the kid is phenomenal, not just because he's my son, the kid is phenomenal. At 21 right now, he's going to Mexico. He just got back from a Mexico trip, 4 days, just him and a couple of his buddies, fish. But I've never had any problems out of him. I mean, he's just a solid kid. Me, I wasn't, no. I fished at a young age, this, that, and the other, but I was also one of those kids where everybody else was, off doing a crazy thing. No, I'm down in the local pond, creek, whatever, with a fishing pole. I mean, I'm from Virginia. We used to walk in creeks and catch snapping turtles and catch muskrats and all that stuff. I strapped myself on a fishing pier doing Hurricane Gloria back in the 80s. That's stupid. But the whole point that I'm trying to make is, if you have younger kids, teenagers, grandmom, grandpa, get them out there. Get them out there, just sit on the water. Some of the best days of fishing is just sit next to a buddy, out there casting and just talking about life. We turn our phones off. Turn them off, we just enjoy the moment. But that's what fishing is to me, and Lake Elsinore has a lot of that to offer. You can see by the great shoreline that we have out here. You can put a lawn chair up anywhere on this facility. There's also another great fishing beach on the west side where you're pretty much just going to catch carp. But here at Launch Point, pretty much this whole northern corridor, you're going to catch every species that's listed on this lake. But with these wipers in here, I'm telling you, bring your kids down now. It is a blast, and they're catching these wipers like, I mean, you throw anything out there. Reaction bait, a night crawler, a mealworm, a crappie jig. They're catching them like no tomorrow. And now is no better time to bring either yourself, your friends, or your kids out to come fishing. With that, that's going to conclude my presentation.
If anybody is going to go fishing, come and talk to this man. He knows. Definitely. That was very good. My name is Chuck Marnell. I think we're that, also known as scare tactic sometimes. But I'm in a bass club in Canadian Lake. Been there for quite some time. I love bass fishing, and that's what I'm going to show you. So, okay. Currently, there's a lot of pressure on Canadian Lake and a lot of lakes in the region. A lot of it's due to COVID, a lot of it's due to just population in general. I have two methods here, and these are tried and true from way back in the day. I've been fishing since I was 1 year old, and I have a picture to prove it. This method right here is called split shot, okay? So if you go to a lake that's pressured, there's a lot of people there, a lot of people fishing, You take a split shot, okay, and you put it on your line. Then you take either a 2-aught or a 3-aught hook, okay, and you can use a worm, you can use a grub, something like that. You cast this out, and you just basically slowly drag it back on the bottom of the lake. And what's going to happen is you're going to get hammered. I mean, they're going to just grab it, and you're going to be on. This method is an old school method, been around for many, many, many years. And it's super tough, the challenge here today. I was told I have 10 minutes to talk about fishing. I could probably do it for days. That's how much beer you got. And I have to use a microphone, which I like to talk with 2 hands, and I'm not Italian. So, anyways, so this is one method. It's called split shot. And you can also use a night crawler on here or some other type of bait, okay? But worms, you know, plastic worms, grubs, that kind of stuff, this will catch you fish any month of the year, winter, summer, it doesn't matter. Second.
For those of you who don't know, a split shot is a little weight. It has a slit at the middle. And you just slide it over your line and then you squeeze it or compress it.
Crimp it on. Yes. Yep. Second true, tried and true method. Okay, I'm giving you guys some. These are total basics. They call this a drop shot. You put the weight at the bottom, you put the hook up at the top here. Okay. This currently is wacky bait. Okay, so you cast this out, you know, maybe close to a tree, close to a structure, whatever, and you just shake it, and the darn thing shakes, and the bass gets mad and he eats it. You know, it's very, very simple. I've won plenty of tournaments doing this. I've caught some large fish doing this. I think the biggest one I've caught doing this is 7 1/4. But I've had some friends that have caught 10 pounders using this method. Called drop shot. So you can also take this and you can hook it about, you know, just the old standard. So it just looks like an old radio worm that's hanging there. But I currently like to use a wacky rig. It seems to get more bites. You can use a night crawler on this if you know, you don't feel the confidence with plastic worms. Let's see.
Hey John, what size line?
I use 8-pound test mostly for bass. That's a medium light, I guess. Then I use 10-pound. I use like crankbaits and the more reaction kind of stuff. I do want to say one thing. I've never been there to the launch point, and it's absolutely beautiful. Whoever is responsible for all this, thank you very much. My wife stayed at the Retros not too long ago with her friends and had a great time ever. But I pulled in here and I went, wow, I go to Kamal all the time. I guess I'm not paying attention. This is a beautiful place over here. Thank you to whoever made that happen. Let's see, what else do we want to know? Okay, this morning I went out for about 15 minutes. I do it often. Wake up early, you know, the family's up, everybody's up. I'll just run out and go fishing at one of the parks in Canyon Lake for 10 or 15 minutes. This morning I caught 6 fish in about 15, 20 minutes. I mean, it was bam, bam, bam. And I caught all these fish. I'll tell you a secret that I use them all the time. And a lot of guys don't use this. A lot of people are kind of afraid of it. And it's called a top water. It's a pod, okay? This goat, you cast this out, it hits the water, lays flat on the water, and you let the rings kind of dissipate, and then you just go bloop, bloop, and the fish just hammer. I hooked one about a week ago or so, and it had to be 6, 7 pounds, and I ended up losing that one. But like this morning, I caught 6, and they were very small fish. They were like 1.5, 2 pounders over at Canyon Lake. As a bass fisherman, and as my bass club goes, we literally hate that. We think it's polluting them. But the facts are on the table. That's not true, because it took about 21 pounds to win this last tournament, this last Saturday, and that whole week we got hammered by the algae. So, you know, maybe the algae's, you know, it's a good thing. I know that there's, everybody's worried that it sucks all the stuff to the bottom, what's happening to the bottom. But the bass fishing is damn good over there at Canyon Lake. The tournament prior to that, oops.
It's stupid, folks.
Yeah.
Stupid good. It's stupid good.
Yeah, they eat a lot of stuff. The tournament prior to that, the month before, it took 33 pounds to win the tournament, which is, and I think the second place guys had a 10, and they didn't even win. So the 21-pound limit on Saturday, they had a 7.5. So that was a nice fish too. My biggest fish personally out of Canyon Lake, I've caught 3 of them, 7 1/4, nothing ever bigger. I've never got a 10-pounder. Anyways, another method for fishing is the Senko. This is, you want to say stupid fishing? It's really simple fishing. You put a hook on your line. I use 8 or 10 pound test, and you just pin it in the middle, wacky rig, and you just cast it out there and let it sink, and just watch your line. And they eat this stuff like it's nobody's business. This is called a Senko, and this is a 5-inch Senko. And we also throw things called icons, and they look like a little squid. They fall vertical. It's real nice. But you know, there's so many lures out there, especially in the year 2022. My gosh, it used to be back in the day you could just, you know, do using a worm or a topwater plug or a crank or a jig. Now it's, oh my gosh, I would have liked to drop a whole tackle on it. I will tell you, they will eat the swim bait quite often, and this is I think this is an 8-inch, and this is, they eat this, and nice fish too. We get a lot of guys catch it. This is called a Hubble Spin. Okay? It looks like a trout, but they don't care. They'll just eat it. Okay? It's got very good tail action. The hook is hidden right there. See that? Yeah. It's called a Hubble Spin, yeah. And they make them in all the different colors and all that good stuff because us fishermen like to buy tons of baits. There's, you know, when you talked about crankbaits, we use bigger ones too, you know. I use some that go down to 29 feet on some of the points and that kind of stuff. I will be honest, I caught a ton of fish on crankbaits in Canyon Lake. I only ate one. And I've had some friends, I've caught some big catfish, 10-pound catfish on crankbaits. Had a friend caught a 25-pound catfish on a crankbait. Let's see. Showing you some of the lures. Okay, this is called a rat. And this one is called, I think this one's nicknamed the morning wood or something to that effect. And it's made out of wood, and it's for the morning. And you throw it out there. And this is just a double jointed. They have triple jointed ones that are a lot larger. And the explosive bites that you see on this end hook, oh my gosh. Yeah, it really is crazy, the old fishing thing. Okay, I'm gonna go for more shocking off here. So, as fishermen, we love to buy expensive baits and that kind of stuff. And, you know, just insanely crazy looking baits. This is a bluegill. This is called a Hiroshima. And it's kind of expensive. I won't even tell you how much it costs because my wife might find out. Let's see. And then, let's see what else we got. So, and if you want to get really crazy and extreme, you know, we can throw this topwater bait, and the bass will eat it. You'll get a 2 or 3 pounder that'll try to eat this thing. I swear to you, it's so weird. The bass are the most aggressive fish in the world. I got some really great videos where, you know, a monster bass is eating a topwater lure, and I watched it. You know, the hookup ratio on topwater is, you know, I'm gonna go about 75%. You know, I feel. I do lose some after I hook them. A lot of times they come up and swat at it and try to kill it. They're not trying to eat it, they want to kill it first. And I miss a lot of bites. Quick story. In 2000, I met a young girlfriend, and she started fishing with me. And it was pretty cool. You know, I'm a single man, I did a lot of fishing, and I met this woman, and she liked going fishing with me. I'm like, dang, man, I feel like I'm in heaven right now. One that goes fishing with me. So we fished tournaments and did all this good stuff out there. And one day I decided that I was going to marry her. So what I did, we were fishing. I took a ring, and I'll tie one knot on one hook, and I'll fish the dang thing all day. I grabbed that ring, and I tied about 10 knots on this thing, okay? I put it on the drop shot rig. And I was going, oh jeez, I get stuck in the rock zone, and I cast out. You know, it was in the stages of her. She was a little impatient, so she got impatient holding that. I said, well, hold this one. So I'm like, whatever, I'm watching. And all of a sudden, she got impatient, so she had to reel that one out. And though I put the ring on the fishing rod. Anyways, I want to cry over there. No, I'm still married to that woman, and this year will be 20 years. And she fished with me a ton. We went to El Salto together, and all that good stuff. I could go on and on. We could talk fishing all day. If any of the scientists, the guys that are into the, the biologists and all that, if you ever really want to know real time information about the lake and what's happening, talk to the bass fishermen or the fishermen in general. There's guys out 24/7, 7 days a week. There's a lot of retired guys in Canyon Lake. I'm self-employed, so I get to go a little bit here and there, and I'm out there quite often. We have a great fishery there, and I feel super blessed where we live and all that good stuff. And I know you're gonna cut us off because we only got 10 minutes. But last but not least, September 17th is the Kids Derby Canyon Lake. The Bassmasters put it on every year. It's all free. You don't have to live there if you get called in. If you want to fish Canyon Lake, make friends with somebody who lives there, and they will take you fishing. Last but not least, take the kids fishing, because it doesn't matter if you catch fish or not. If you take the kids fishing, whether they're your kids, the neighbor kids, your nieces, nephews, grandkids, whatever, take the kids fishing, because that's what matters. It really does. So anyways, thank you very much. I feel honored.
Thank you so much. I didn't want to interrupt because it seems like you're having so much fun and all this information is, it makes you want to go fishing, right? Next up we have Daria from the Army Corps of Engineers, and I know we're already close to the end, but Daria unfortunately will stick around a little longer, so if you guys can too, that'd be great. She'll go through her presentation as quickly as she can. I lost my notes, I apologize. But I'll just say really quickly that the Army Corps project, as I mentioned, Elstern Valley Municipal Water District, in partnership with the city and Riverside County Flood Control District, is working on this project with the Army Corps, and she'll go over that. But Daria's been tremendous to work with. I'm just so grateful that she's fully engaged in our lake and the future of this watershed. So I'm pleased to introduce Daria.
Awesome. Well, I don't want to stand between you guys and some time on the lake, but I am excited to be here today to talk about the great work that our team has been doing with so many folks here. We're really excited about it. So we are working on a project under the CAP program, or Continuing Authorities Program. So what is CAP? Maybe Amy can tell you, but probably you've never heard of it. So basically, the Continuing Authorities Program of the Corps is a series of standing authorities. So as long as you fit within these categories, you don't have to go to Congress for specific authorization for a study, nor to construct. So it's actually funded under our Construction General Program, which is great. So this is about getting projects in the ground and the implementation. And the reason that we have these standing authorities is because Congress says, you know what, these are smaller, less complex, less expensive programs, so you don't have to come to us for a permission slip for each one. We're going to give you a sort of general permission slip if you stay within these bounds. And so we like that because we like to be able to get things done. And these are the different programs that we have under CAP. So this is a 206 for aquatic ecosystem restoration. And we can spend $10 million of federal money on it. So it is a cost-shared program with our partners, our non-federal sponsors. So the study is cost-shared 50-50, and then the implementation is 65 federal, 35 non-federal. So that ends up, depending on how much you spend on the design and study, between $12 and $15 million of a project. And you know, there are a number of different other authorities that I'm happy to stay after and talk to folks about, or you can send me an email. So it's a two-phase process. The first is the study, and then we come up with a final report that has our selected plan that we identify during the study. We do the environmental compliance, and we do the preliminary design enough to feel confident in that our cost estimates are good. And We try to complete the study within 2 years or less, including that preliminary design. And then we can move straight into design and implementation. Once we put in that funding request, we get our implementation money, and then we sign a new agreement for implementation. So I'm gonna sort of speed this up a little because I know we're over. Some key points here are that we can do recreation as part of the CAP 206 also, which is great, especially in a place like Elsinore. The stipulations of that are we can spend 10% of the total project cost on recreation features, and those have to be independently justified. So we have to show that the benefit to the nation in terms of like increased recreation and utilization, increased business for local businesses, things like that, exceeds the cost of those recreation features, but that's great news. And then the operations and maintenance of the project once it's built, that is 100% on our partners. The feds don't like to take over long-term operations and maintenance if they can avoid it. So we pass that off to our local sponsors to kind of care for the project once it's built. And so we do need to tie our restoration to hydrologic regimes and restore native species, so not native. And then we're focused on aquatic restoration, so we're not doing a lot of uplands as part of our jurisdiction. So this is our timeline, and we are working towards that red star, the tentatively selected plan milestone. We completed our federal interest determination. That picture up at the top left is from our kickoff when we signed our feasibility cost sharing agreement. Congressman Calvert was there and has been really supportive of getting this project off the ground. So basically, we have fewer milestones in CAP than we do in our larger study, which is great. A little bit less red tape. We try to get to that decision point earlier, and part of that is, scaling and scoping the analysis to be like a more appropriate level for the complexity of the study that we're doing. And since CAP is for less complex projects, we try to speed that up so we have more of that money to spend on the actual construction. And yeah, so once we identify a plan, we release a report for concurrent review, including agency, stakeholder, public review. We'll have a public meeting, and then we'll incorporate the comments and respond to them, finalize it, and get approval. So this, you guys know this better than I do. This is just an overview of the area and some of the problems that we're trying to address. These are the problems and opportunities that we kind of identified for our particular project. Loss and degradation of the aquatic and riparian habitat, loss of floodplain habitats, and the spread of non-native invasive plants and fish, potentially amphibians. And we're really looking at opportunities to restore those ecosystems, educate the community on the importance of the aquatic and riparian habitat, as well as kind of some of these causes of the algal blooms and fish kills, and how homeowners and businesses can help. So there are, other opportunities for engagement that maybe we won't implement as part of this project, but we can talk about and use the project and the outreach that we do as part of the project to kind of reach the community and talk about those things. We want to increase recreational opportunities in ways that are sensitive to the environment, provide connectivity to other trails in the area, and we see an opportunity to use that wastewater treated effluent that the Municipal Water District provides to help restore habitats and improve water quality in the lake, and linking habitat corridors, improving water quality, et cetera, et cetera. We are going to look at potential use of vegetation plants that are significant to Native American tribes of the area so that we can kind of increase that access to culturally significant species. And then these are our objectives and constraints. We don't want to increase flood risk. We want to consider water availability and droughts and fluctuating lake levels over time so that the project can be adaptable and minimize impacts to recreation. And then our main objectives, are to restore that native and sustainable riparian and wetland habitat, and to increase the recreational and educational opportunities. So we kind of approach this a bunch of different ways, you know, throw a bunch of stuff at the wall, see what sticks, and then we do our analysis. So we wanted to focus on invasive species removal as a first step, and then where we remove those invasives, replanting of native species, and make sure that there's a mix of drought-tolerant species so that if we have a drought, you don't have a die-off and then the invasives come back in, but you can have some continuity over time. We are also thinking, okay, what's the smallest plan that can get benefits? And we want to be consistent with existing and planned land uses. Our partners have expressed, you know, we want to try to have a low maintenance design cost, something that's sustainable that isn't going to cost a ton of money to manage over time. And of course, we want to maximize benefits to listed, threatened, and endangered species, and maximize those ecosystem benefits. So we came up with a few alternatives, and I'm going to talk you through some of those. One is a wetland restoration alternative. One is a riparian habitat alternative along the San Jacinto River corridor as it comes into Lake Elsinore. And then we also are looking at a tamarisk removal and vernal pool restoration in the back basin behind that levee area, and then some different combinations of those. So this is our wetland ecosystem one. It's right over by the old boat launch, where I think Lakeshore Drive meets East Co, if I'm getting that right. There's a park behind there. So this is where the inflow of the treated effluent comes into the lake. And also right above there is where the flood control channel kind of enters into the lake. And so we see an opportunity to do some wetland restoration there, which would have a number of different benefits. One is it would help filter water from the lake. It can create nursery habitat for fish so that those little fish as they're growing have somewhere to forage and hide and get bigger. So fish often spawn in these areas as well. And we want to connect the urban runoff to the wetland so that it gets cleaned and filtered before it enters the lake as well. Part of why we chose this location is because it's the inflow of the treated water. There's a permanent water supply source, so that helps with long-term sustainability of the wetland. We are also thinking of maybe putting in a circulator pump. We're going to evaluate that, which would circulate water from the lake into the wetland, which would maximize the filtration and the water quality benefits of the wetland. It would cost more to operate and maintain, obviously, because you have that pump component. But we're going to look at it, and but that would also help during periods where the lake is really low, or when the lake is high and the effluent isn't put into the lake. It could provide water to the wetland further up, even when that water isn't coming in. So we're looking at maybe having a fishing pier, although now after hearing your talk, I'm like, we don't need a pier, we can just get a lawn chair. But also a wildlife viewing station. There has been a lot of urban camping, homeless encampments in this area. We have found that when you have more recreation and more visibility, more eyes, that kind of helps discourage camping. So having wildlife viewing can help with that. And then also bring more recreators in. The wetland species that we're looking at are low shrubby species versus trees that are more conducive to privacy and kind of invite people to put up camp, so to speak. So that's this alternative. And we want to do some information signs, maybe some tables to gut fish, I don't know, or picnic. I would love folks' thoughts on that afterwards. So. And then this is our alternative 2, which is a riparian habitat restoration. So the prices that were on this last one, these are very preliminary prices from our federal interest determination. We're doing a more refined one now. And that 2.3 to 2.7 million for this alternative doesn't include the recreation pier or the circulator pump, which were new ideas that we came up with during our study. So. This one is a little bit more expensive, at least in our initial conceptual cost estimate, so 5.4 to 6.4 million. It's a much larger area, so you see going up all the way past Summerhill Drive, and it would be a mix of removing invasive tamarisk. So tamarisk, I didn't know about tamarisk before I started this project, but now I'm learning a lot. It's an invasive tree that has very deep roots that can go as far as 30 feet deep, and they suck up a lot of water. So, and this area has a lot of invasive tamarisk, and so when you count up all the trees, and the bigger ones take even more water, and how deep their roots are, we think that it's actually contributing a lot to some of the water quality problems in the lake, because you have all these trees sucking up water from the water table that's connected to the lake. So if we remove those trees and replace them with native or riparian trees that take less water and provide better habitat for birds and things like that, we might see some nice water quality improvements as well. So moving from reach 1 into reach 2A and 2B, you have a lot more tamarisk invasive there, so that would be a little bit more intensive tamarisk removal and some plantings. And then reach 3, in between that development and, is that a baseball? Diamond Stadium. So that area is right between reach 3 and 4. There's a rock weir that was put in when the levee was put in and the river was reconfigured. Probably to keep the river during high flows from shooting and causing a bunch of erosion on that opposite bank. But what it seems to be doing as well is keeping standing water back there and creating a great environment for tamarisk to grow. So there's like a whole tamarisk forest in reach 3 that we would like to remove and maybe excavate, maybe add a little bit of a meandering channel there. We see a good opportunity for improving recreation trails on both sides of that reach, which is nice too because it's got a lot of people and development around there, so it might get some high use. And we could even connect it to the levee trail on the other side. And so having that connectivity can increase sort of the spans that people can enjoy when they're out getting their exercise. So then we're also thinking of maybe putting a pipe through the rock weir to kind of improve drainage through it so that the water doesn't stand as much. We're going to look into that. And then there's some sediment accretion happening. Do I have a pointer on this thing? Oh, no. Oh, I just have an off switch, kill switch. So you'll see the little like lip at the bottom or nub of accreted sediment that is also filled in with, you guessed it, tamarisk, and reach 4 on that northern bank. So we want to remove that and excavate it down, maybe spread out that sediment and try to create a different elevation that would maybe be less susceptible to tamarisk regrowth. So yeah, so this is this alternative. I think I covered everything. Okay, and then this is our third alternative, which we got some feedback on the other day that maybe this isn't such a viable alternative. So that's something else I'd love to hear from folks on what you think. But there's a lot of tamarisk growth in this area, and then there's also some vernal pools. And for those of you who don't know, vernal pools are pools that come and go depending on the water availability, but they provide really valuable habitat. And they're in areas that are often developed in California, so there aren't very many vernal pools left in California. So they do provide really important habitat. And the water regime and elevations and sort of like topography under all that tamarisk, we think is already good for vernal pools, so we wouldn't have to move dirt too much, which reduces the price, but we would do some tamarisk removal and plantings in this area. We're thinking that this is probably, a lot of this is privately owned land, so it may be too expensive to acquire that property. We can only spend 25% of the budget for federal dollars on real estate acquisition, so that is this alternative. And we would also do some improved signage, mile markers, recreation enhancements in this alternative. And then we have a combination alternative where we mix and match things and see sort of what is the best buy in terms of habitat. So what am I going to talk about now? The conceptual ecosystem models. So this is going to wake some of you up because it's really exciting.
Good diagram.
Yeah, I do. I've got some good diagrams. So basically, these are models where we try to understand, like, what are the drivers in the system? What are the things that are harming the ecosystem? How does that affect, like, how these things interconnect? And how can we, like, reverse some of that to restore them? And we simplify them. So there can be many potential conceptual models for an ecosystem. They reflect our personal understanding and viewpoint. They're not objective. And they're not the truth. They're a simplified depiction of reality, and they're not comprehensive. They focus only on the parts that we're sort of focusing on for the relevance because of our objectives of our study. And they're flexible. We can change them as we learn more. So here's my exciting diagram of the wetland conceptual model. I'm not going to go through all of this with you. I really included these. My boss was like, take those out, that's too much. But I was like, no, this is a technical audience, and I feel like it's just a little flavor taste of, you know, what are the ways that we're thinking and how do these systems interrelate. And so the gray are the stressors on the ecosystem. So things like prior land management, you know, like putting in Canyon Lake Dam totally changed the hydrology and how things move. The levee did as well, paving the channels, right? So those change the hydrology and remove habitat. Things like the septic systems and urban runoff also contribute pollutants to the lake. And so those are the things that cause reduced ecosystem function and the low population abundance or biomass. So those are these things in yellow are the things that we want to try to reverse through our project to try to get these performance measures and outcomes in green, which is basically our goal. So this is the wetland one. And then we have the riparian one as well. So they're pretty similar. I'm not going to go through all of them, but this is how we're trying to think about this conceptually. And then we are going to also do some numerical modeling and basically try to identify our best buy plan, which is because habitat values, the way the core measures them, we don't measure it in money, we measure it in habitat value, right? So it's like, we don't want to put a dollar figure on it, even though there are lots of ways to quantify what ecosystem services habitat provides to society, which, like, if we were to replace forests, right, which clean our air, it would cost probably trillions of dollars to try to get those same services back to society. So sometimes it's cheaper to just not cut the forest down. Anyway, I'm going on a tangent, but basically, because we're not looking at a benefit to cost ratio of dollars to dollars in restoration, we still want to find what's the best bang for your buck, what's the best investment of taxpayer dollars to get a good outcome, our best buy, and so this is our process for doing it. We do what's called cost-effective incremental cost analysis, where we basically, so this graph on the top, the outputs are in habitat values and the cost is in dollars. And so for additional expenditure, you want to get more output. But when you do your analysis, you don't always get that. So those are the plans that are in gray above that sort of bottom line. The bottom line shows the cost-effective and best buy plans. The ones above it are the ones where you're spending more money, but you're not getting more. So we're not going to build those. So that's kind of our process. You'll see that we get a lot of cost-effective and best buy plans, so then the rest is like a team decision and analysis of like, what do we really care about, what are we trying to get, and that's the recommendation that we put forth and try to get buy-in on from our decision makers. So part of telling that story to identify what do we really care about is looking at all the benefits that our projects can provide, not just to the habitat, but to things like the regional economy, to our communities. We want to see, can we advance equity and environmental justice in our communities? LEISWA is majority non-white. It has a lot of women-owned businesses. Can we serve these historically underserved communities well with our projects as well? Can we enhance the recreation, the aesthetics, the culture, cultural experience that the lake and our amenities provide? So, and then we also look at national economic development, you know, are we reducing emergency costs, the recreation ties into that, things like that, regional job growth. So We have a new policy in the Corps that we're really excited about, which is called the Comprehensive Benefit Memo. It's really exciting. But basically, we're supposed to look at all of these things equally now, and it gives us a little bit more flexibility in terms of telling that story of why we should recommend something versus just sticking within the narrow authority of the plan. So, this is a little bit touching on some of the earlier conversations. So the Corps does do a lot of dredging. We have a lot of experts, international experts. And our Engineer Research and Development Center, or ERDIC, is where a lot of them live. They all have PhDs. They're really pretty and fun. And they know a lot. And so I reached out to some of my ERDIC contacts and was like, who knows the most about dredging for restoration and harmful algal blooms? And they were like, oh, these are the guys you need to talk to. So we met with them, a lot of you were there, and they recommended that we put in a statement of need for the dredging and operation technical services, which is 80 hours of free consulting from them on dredging. So we have put in for that. We're crossing our fingers that we get that allocation. So hopefully they can come out and do a site visit and help us kind of scope out what some future efforts might look like in terms of investigating opportunities to dredge for restoration. We have some other programs after that we could use that to put in, you know, potential future planning assistance to states, things like that. They also recommended that we put in for their aquatic nuisance species research program, which is an existing and funded program looking at harmful algal blooms and technologies and techniques to address them across the nation. You know, when I said that the Corps turns over our project, the one exception is we do have some dams that we build with lakes that are owned and operated by the Army Corps of Engineers throughout the nation. We actually, I think, have more parks for recreation to the public than the National Park Service. And so because of that, we are also dealing with some of the same issues that you are. And so we have gotten our ERDIC big brains to try to help us figure out how to address some of these problems as well. So we're going to try to get Lake Elsinore into that existing research program as like a site that they can come and collect data or analyze the data that you're already collecting and see if there's any lessons learned that we can leverage here. So that's something that I'm working on trying to coordinate. They were optimistic that we would get this because most of the sites are currently located on the East Coast or the Midwest, so it's good to have some West Coast sites as well. And yeah, so where we are in the process, you know, next steps and opportunities for future engagement. The bolded things are the really opportunities for future engagement where we would love to hear from you. I will say that when I'm writing my reports and talk, they like to know, what do the public say, what do agencies say, what do stakeholders say, and the projects where you can say, hey, we got 100 comments and they were all supporting this project and saying, we need this, we support this is important to us and here's why. That is really helpful for me in telling my story and getting approval and implementation dollars and even increasing kind of the budget priority for getting that implementation dollars. So even if everything you hear is great and you're not like, oh, I'm doing it all wrong, I still want to hear from you. Because our decision makers, you know, they don't want a controversial project that they're going to get blowback on. They want a project that people are really going to like because we don't get to fund all of our projects. They don't all go funded. So that is that. And here's my contact info. I know a lot of people are going to have to run. Please feel free to reach out to me. I'd love to hear from you. I'm happy to answer questions and stick around for a little bit as well. So thank you very much.
I didn't hear anything with reference to dredging an island in the center of the lake. We started about 30 years ago recommending that we dredge an island in the lake so it would be a great recreational place for our people. Not only that, but we have deep water all the way around. And I think it's going to really try to push that because it's something that everybody gains from that individual move.
Yes, thank you. So, what's your name, sir? Jack. Jack. Jack was asking about this alternative, which was something that we did look at during the federal interest determination, which is dredging and constructing aquatic islands using the dredge material. So the conceptual cost range that was developed for that was between $16 and basically $19 million, which exceeds what we can do within the CAP program. So that's not a small project. That doesn't mean it's not a viable or a good project, but we basically said, okay, we can't do that under CAP, so let's not focus too much and spend too much of our dollars on investigating this here since we can't build it. And the more that we spend on investigating it through this program, the less we can spend on things that we can do under CAP. So that's why we set up that meeting with the ERDIC folks and are looking for other avenues to funnel dollars that aren't coming from our study into looking at that as a potential future thing. For larger general investigation studies, you know, the last big study that I got approved was in New York in the Rockaways. It's like a $600 million construction project, so we do really big projects, but they need specific congressional authorization both to study and then they need appropriations or money to do. And then once you have a recommendation, it needs a new specific authority and money to construct as well. So there's just more congressional hurdles. That doesn't mean that they can never happen, but that's something that could be built under a general investigations program if it was determined to have a good, you know, just cost justification through that study. So
I think you would gain a lot more with the island. As I remember, anyway, I think it was about $20 million, but you have 3 spots there. We were talking about one huge island there, which also people could get there by a bridge. But the main thing is that all that water around there is really deep water. You eliminate a lot of problems. You know, fishermen can tell you that. And the recreational lake would probably be the best one in California.
yeah, so what I would recommend is reach out to your local representatives and say that you would like to see a study into doing something like this and see if you can get an authority for that. And, you know, we're happy to talk on the side about specific language that might be useful for trying to get something done and work with you. We're not allowed to lobby Congress ourselves, but you guys are. Any other questions?
Well, thank you so much for sticking around, everyone.